Attention Talking Simpsons listeners, we have a special mini-series just for you.
We're going through the entire first season of King of the Hill, and you can only hear it if you're a $5 and up patron at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons.
We're giving the Talking Simpsons treatment to all 13 episodes of King of the Hill's first season, and if you want a free sample, you'll find the first episode available for free in the Talking Simpsons feed. Patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons. It's the only place you'll find the first season of Talk King of the Hill.
Made you go click, 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 click. It's real easy, man.
Cartoons from present and the past. Every week will be an animated bash. What a cartoon! What a cartoon! Maybe a short but mostly shows. We'll talk, we'll analyze, exploring as we go. What a cartoon! What a cartoon! What a cartoon!
Hello, everybody, and welcome to What a Cartoon, where our promises of lasers are greatly exaggerated. I'm your host, the very popular in Denmark, Bob Mackey, and this is an audio exploration of every cartoon ever. Who is here with me today?
Henry Gilbert, and hurricanes are not unlike my life.
And who do we have on the line?
I am Matthew J., and I am currently staring at a complete set of the newest DuckTales action figure set.
Wow, we got the expert, folks. And today's episode is the DuckTales 1987 episode, Back to the Klondike.
Pluck my tail feathers and call me Baldy.
So yes, I think that we have brought up DuckTales on roughly 65% of our podcast because it's such a pivotal moment in the history of American television animation for children.
Yeah.
And now we're finally talking about it, and we have Matthew J. on the line, and he is the biggest duck expert I know, period. So thanks for joining us, Matt. I think you'd be insulted if we did not ask you to be on this podcast.
I think at this point, just because of my brand and my connection to you guys, it would be a PR nightmare, if anything.
They'd be like, what happened to Matt J?
Yeah.
And this is our second Disney Afternoon episode. We did do Darkwing, if you guys want to hear our Darkwing thoughts.
And Gargoyles. That counts too. So third, right?
Okay, sure, yes. All right, third with Gargoyles.
Marsupilami's next, right, guys?
I'm more of a Schnookums and Meat guy myself.
Oh, God.
So I think it's the
Disney
third.
can do their own Ren and Stimpy. It's just as good.
I'm sure I've mentioned that cartoon like 3 times on this podcast too, and I apologize for it.
It was a dark time for all of us.
Yes, everyone needed to make their own Ren and Stimpy. It was fine. But before we start, I want to talk about our history with the show. We normally do that, talking about how we discovered the show and when we watched it. Now, Matt, you actually are younger than DuckTales, so I'm curious as to how you discovered this cartoon.
Yes, because DuckTales starts in 87 and I'm born in 89. But when I was a kid, the Disney Afternoon comes a little bit later, which was like a syndicated package that they'd send around. Everyone listening to this knows that. So I experienced that a bit. And then also, after the Disney Afternoon, they shoved all these shows onto the Disney Channel. And I think I'm sure they were syndicated somewhere, but for me, they became this like special thing that was only when we got the Disney Channel weekends. And did you guys remember that when you'd get like Disney Channel for the weekend?
Yes, it was an amazing treat.
Before it became
we'd get that, and
cable.
I loved Gummy Bears. For some reason, Gummy Bears was, I think, my favorite of those shows at that time. And this will surprise people. The original DuckTales, I'm not a huge fan of as an adult. It's actually like, I think that it's aged almost the poorest of any of the major Disney Afternoon shows, except animation-wise. I think it might be the best looking one because this episode is just an amazing 80s anime that we're going to talk about.
It is gorgeous, yeah.
It looks amazing. But yeah, I mostly discovered them like on cable, and then because, the nostalgia wave of the 80s really hit when I was a teenager, and we all revisited all that stuff all the time.
I first watched it in its original run as a kid, and I liked it, but I think my response as a kid was, this didn't feel real without Donald in it. I didn't know anything about the Barks comics. It was just, I saw a tease of Donald in the first episode, and I was like, where's Donald? I want Donald. He's the star.
I should be the only one on this podcast. Everyone else hates DuckTales.
So, I didn't like it as much then, but it was definitely, I knew it was better than everything else I was seeing when I was 8, animation and storytelling wise, and it was more fun, and it did have the prestige of Disney, so I really liked it. As more shows were added to the afternoon cavalcade of series together, it was I didn't like it as much as a kid as Darkwing, as Goof Troop. I liked it more than Chip and Dale. That's in my Tailspin is about equal to Tailspin. But anyway, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't my favorite. But as time went on, I've kind of gone in and out of loving it. And the more I got into the original comics these were based on, I then liked it less because I was like, oh, they bastardized the comics. But then as I learned more about the production of it, I was like, I actually appreciate the production of it for different anime reasons. And so now I'm in this weird middle ground of like, I like this show, but I like other versions of this better.
Interesting. So Henry and I were both 5 when this debuted, 5 years old, and I remembered I watched a lot of cartoons before DuckTales, but I do remember seeing the 5-part 2-hour movie that I believe aired in primetime. I remember watching that at my grandma's house and just being captivated by it. And after that, again, I would watch anything, but I remember DuckTales was my first favorite show. I remember, like, I would drop everything to watch DuckTales. I knew when it was on. So between the ages of, like, 5 and 8, I was super into DuckTales. And I remember, like, at the age of 8, like, reflecting upon my youth after seeing the movie and saying, like, you know what? I really like DuckTales.
Well, and the game did influence my enjoyment
Yes,
of DuckTales
the game
too.
is really good. It's the reason it's the one game they remade. And that remake is shitty.
Yeah, I think that everything you guys just said, but especially what Henry just said, also clarifies the way I felt. Where, like, when I say I think it's aged not as well as the other ones, I'm also comparing it to some of the greatest cartoons, like, of American television history, like Darkwing Duck. Although you did name Tailspin and Rescue Rangers, which, yes, are not as good as DuckTales. Now that I think about those, I was mainly thinking, like, what are the ones I don't like as much? It's just more Supalami, I guess. And I also feel the same way about how, like, yes, the more you learn about it, it is this amazing piece of television history. But also, I just like to get out of the gate and say that I'm not the biggest original DuckTales show fan, because people just assume that when they look at, like, anything that I own, because I own every piece of Duck merchandise that I can. But my obsession comes from the comics. Just like Henry just said, I'm obsessed with Scrooge. Scrooge McDuck is my favorite character in all of fiction.
You're one of those Don Rosa types, I see.
Yeah.
I do like the Don. Actually, Don Rosa, because Fantagraphics does these very nice big hardcovers that I know you guys also own. And I tend to focus more on the Rosa ones just because I got in on that on the ground floor and have been able to get all of them as they come out. And the Barks ones, there's just so many that I get those, like, whenever I can. But yes, I'm a Don Rosa. I'm not quite his level of, like, DuckTales is shit. No one should like DuckTales. And he has a sign on his table that's like, don't fucking talk to me about DuckTales when your head is at conventions. But yes, my obsession comes from the comics. I like the old show, although I will say, I know we'll talk about it a bit, but the new show for me is, like, maybe the platonic example of what I want kids television to be from here on out for the rest of my life.
Okay, we'll wrap up our history segment with a brief chat about DuckTales 2017, but we have a lot of history to go through. So number 1, I am not a Carl Barks expert. So number 2, we do a lot of podcasts every week, and I only have so much time to do research, but I actually requested extra time because this is like 70 years of research, possibly 100 if you want to go into Barks' entire life. Carl Barks, basically the creator of Uncle Scrooge, although the credits of DuckTales would not have you know that in any way. But
that creator by credit really pisses me off.
Yes,
actually.
no, it's created by Walt Disney. He signed all the comics. But we have so much history to go through. I am now setting a timer. We only have 1 hour because this podcast would be 4 hours long. And as of this recording, it has to go up in a few days. So I'm hitting start now. So let's start talking about the history of Uncle Scrooge. Now, this character, you probably know who he is based on the fact that you're listening to a DuckTales podcast, but I shouldn't have to point this out, but he's named after Ebenezer Scrooge from A Christmas Carol. Gasp.
Right.
Although I think now he's better, more known than Ebenezer Scrooge.
I think so, yeah.
I mean, he's got the chin whiskers and everything. I don't think Ebenezer Scrooge is Scottish.
I would think he had spats. Like,
Yeah.
I would think Ebenezer Scrooge was probably quite racist to Scots, actually, the Scotch people.
But you're right. But he was not as extravagantly wealthy as Scrooge, of course. But he was the most well-known miser, which is where Scrooge gets his name.
It was a descriptive term for a miser, even in 1950s or 40s.
Yeah.
So,
And that book was fairly new when Carl Barks was born
yeah,
in 1901.
that's true.
Yeah, and Scrooge appears in A Christmas Story. That's where he first comes from. So,
That's right.
It all makes sense.
So let's get into that. We'll talk about the creator next, but Uncle Scrooge's first appearance was in the December 1947 Dell 4-color comics issue in the Donald Duck story Christmas on Bear Mountain. That is the introduction of the character known as Uncle Scrooge. He doesn't have a lot of the same characteristics we know him by, and the story is all about Uncle Scrooge inviting Donald to his mansion in order to test his courage by dressing up as a bear to scare him. And if he passes the test, they will get their Christmas gifts, Donald and the nephews.
He does a lot more bear costumery in that than he does in any other one. And he's drawn much older than he usually is. I just reread it. And
He's got the full, like, kind of beard along with the sideburns.
Yeah.
Looks more like Glomgold than...
Yeah.
and by the way, number one, let's get this out of the way. It's Glomgold. Too many people say Glumgold, and it pisses me off.
Me too. I hear it on podcasts all the time.
Glumgold? Yeah, it's Glomgold. Thank you very much.
yeah.
I've probably said
That was Bob Mackey's
Glumgold.
Cranky Corner. I was not looking at Henry while pointing that out. I just want to get that out of the way. If any of you say glum, I'm turning this podcast around.
But okay, it is, it just made sense to me that his first appearance is in A Christmas Story. So
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I'm glad he avoided making a parody of A Christmas Carol, which were probably not as hacky in 1947, rather. Sorry, actually 1952. Yeah, I got it right the first time.
No, not that hacky then. And yeah, he's but he's the ghost testing them, and
That's true.
And of course, though, he gets scared by by a real bear while he's scaring them as a fake bear.
I never saw that coming. This comic was drawn and written by Carl Barks, and this character would eventually get his own comic by March of 1952. So after that Christmas Story, he had 3 more Dell 4-color comics, and then Uncle Scrooge, the comic series, officially started with number 4.
He proved so popular as a Donald Duck guest star that they so quickly spun him off into his own stories, because once they shifted him from just a sad old man, as I believe he calls himself in one of his first appearances, once they transitioned that to being like the cheapest adventurer of all time, those are fun stories.
I think
They're just
Scrooge's
great stories.
I think his tagline was "I hate everybody and everybody hates me." He was a real Shrek character in those days.
I post that panel on Twitter a lot for various reasons.
That is great. It's a good Twitter post.
It's so weird, and it still to this day baffles me. Again, my favorite character in all of fiction. I think it's weird that we've had like 2 major kids animated shows about a 100-year-old man who hates everyone and is rich and like doesn't give anyone money. Like, it's such an odd thing and goes in the face of everything that like an executive has ever told you about how kids TV works. You just have to be like Scrooge McDuck. Kids fucking love the action figures I was talking about. It's impossible to find Scrooge and Donald on the show. Donald especially. I've only seen Donald twice ever, and I only bought one. I bought 4 Scrooges because in the last year, that's all I've seen is the 4, and I've bought every one of those. It's nuts.
So I want to talk about Carl Barks. So 1901 to 2000, lived 99 years. Number one, get this out of the way. I know Thad Komorowski is listening. He is a Barks historian. I'm but a mere amateur at Barks history.
A dilettante.
So, I mean, there's 100 years of history here. We're going to touch upon the main points of Carl Barks' life. There's a lot to go over here, but he's a very important person in terms of the history of comics in America.
I'd say worldwide comics even.
Yes, you're totally right about that. More popular in Denmark, like Don Rosa. But he was known as, quote unquote, the good duck artist for a while because the artist's work was uncredited. It was like by Walt Disney. What can't he do? That's how everything was credited. Walt Disney did the newspaper comics of Mickey Mouse as well, even after he was dead. How did it happen?
No, that's that whole practice sucks so hard. But I think too it was just seen as like, these are kids' comics. Who cares who draws them? They're like toilet paper, basically. They're shit. Nobody cares. These are for babies. But also even back then, in superhero comics, while they would put the names on them, there were often, pseudonyms for people, or like people below letterer wouldn't get covered.
Less Jewish pseudonyms.
Yes, also
than their real names.
Yeah. And it was
Hank, do you know the Marv Wolfman story about that?
No. What's that story?
Marv Wolfman, one of the greatest writers in comics ever, back in the 60s when he was first getting started. The Comics Code had just launched, and you weren't allowed to say certain words in comics, and also comic credits were weird. So he was credited by one of those weird things as the Wandering Wolfman. And they were told you're not allowed to say Wolfman on the cover of a comic. And I always thought this was fake. And I actually just recently learned this was real. And they had like a big fight about it. And then we're like, fine, we'll change it. And they had to like prove, no, this is his name. And then that led to like new rules in the way people are credited, including using their real names on the covers of comics.
Wow, that's amazing. I did not know that story. Wow.
Yeah, I'm sure that was very truncated. There's other like legal stuff about it that people can look up. I don't want to take up too much time in our timed segment.
Yes.
I would not argue with a Wolfman, number one. I'd let him win that argument.
That's why he was a good EIC.
Karl Barks had quite a life. Let's pick up where he left off in 1935 at the age of, I assume, 34. He did a lot of stuff before that. Read his biographies. There are many of them. But in the most important part of his life is that he started as an in-betweener at Disney in 1935, and he proved to be so good at gags and writing comical situations that he was then transferred to the story department.
I had heard that one of the gags he's credited as is the one where Donald, with the automatic hair cutting machine, turns Donald upside down and starts clipping his butt instead of his head.
That's an amazing scene. But yes, by 1937, he was working exclusively on Donald Duck cartoons with his partner, Jack Hanna, number one, not William Hanna of Hanna-Barbera. I was confused at first while doing research. There are different
Or the
animation
animal
Hannas.
guy.
Yes, or the animal guy. Too many Hannas out there, but Jack Hanna was his partner at Disney. And in the 30s, Donald Duck broke off from Mickey and Goofy to be in his own cartoons. He was like the most popular character.
Easily the most popular, yeah. Well, everybody wants the angry guy who can just like smash shit and express anger at being an everyday man, which Mickey can't really do, and Goofy is the opposite. All the bad things that happen to Goofy, he's just like, well, dorsh.
Yeah. So he worked at Disney. He eventually left Disney in 1942, quote, due to air conditioning bothering his sinuses, unquote, and also worsening working conditions during Disney's wartime period.
I mean, that's when the strike was bubbling up.
The strike was a year before he left, so I have to assume there were a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of resentment. I mean, Barks grew up in a time period where there was no social safety net, there was no quote-unquote welfare, there was no social security. People were just left to starve and die if they couldn't afford anything. So, like a lot of Scrooge is based on his own experiences, jumping from job to job, and his experiences that he knew from family members and friends, because you didn't like go to college and then have your full-time job. College was for super rich people and the elite. It's not like everyone goes to college now. So life was very hard scrabble before there was more of a social safety net, and that's what Scrooge reflects, like all of his adventures. Before he quit, he moonlighted with his partner Jack Hanna with the one-shot comic Donald Duck Finds Pirate Gold, and this would be the first of many treasure hunting stories in his Duck comics. And his first Duck story was on his own, I believe, was a 10-pager called The Victory Garden, published in 1943. And from there, he published roughly 500 stories and really expanded Donald Duck's world. So 500 Duckiverse stories with Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge and Gyro Gearloose and the whole gang.
I mean, every inch of Duckburg is his creation. Like
yes.
He started with the seed of Donald Duck and the nephews and just grew out an entire world from that. It's an amazing, just mythology building alone is just amazing, let alone his abilities as a comic storyteller. And also like the idea of putting adventure stories for Donald, like that's not what he was doing in his shorts or in movies. Mickey had adventures. Donald like was just put upon and angry. He was like a bellhop or a guy wrapping presents. Like he didn't go places or find pirate treasure or square eggs. That wasn't what Donald did.
He's very old too. It's funny to think that his comics career started in his 40s and he invented Uncle Scrooge in his 50s. And
that gives me hope.
I read that after he left Disney, he tried different things like starting a chicken farm. I love the idea of work back then where it's not like, how will this look on my resume? It's just like, I'm done being an animator. How about chickens? Like, it didn't matter. He wasn't updating his LinkedIn or anything like that. I love that.
It is pretty cool.
But Barks' identity was not discovered until 1960 when he was visited by two fans who cracked his artistic code. And from there, word of his identity spread throughout the comics collectors and fans market. And I love listening to, again, another name drop for Gilbert Gottfried's podcast. You hear all these people who are in their 70s and 60s now. You used to be able to like call old celebrities on the phone. You used to be able to call up the Three Stooges on the phone or visit them in their old folks' home or in their crappy little apartments because no one took care of them. It was a different time for being a comic artist, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Dana Gould and all his friends, all his like 100-year-old friends that were in Ed Wood movies.
Like Vampiro. He just like but that story, one, that he was known as the good duck artist. That was his before people knew the name Carl Barks, they just knew these comics are better than the other ones. These are good duck artists. And, if you read enough comic books, you can tell a Donald drawn by Barks different from one of his contemporaries. But I also like that his anonymity and his generation of artists, I think of, like Jack Kirby or John Romita, that like they worked in these fantastical stories, but there was a sense of shame to it. It's like, well, didn't I really want to work for Madison Avenue, drawing billboards or ads, or this wasn't my dream. And then the next generation of artists then are the mega fanboys of these, mild-mannered men. And so they become intense fanboys of this work. And then the funny thing is, on the next generation, you have the fanboys of the fanboys who are even more intense than that. But Carl just sounds like a very, normal dude who wrote great stories and obviously cared about it, but also didn't think he was so great, I suppose.
I mean, comic books and cartoons were invented in his lifetime. Like he saw the inventions of these mediums.
Yeah, that's the classic Stan Lee thing is, he wanted to be the great American novelist, and then he wanted to be a film screenwriter, and he always felt like he was trapped in comic books. And that's why he is Stan the Man Lee. That's why he's the Funky Flash Man, because he was like, let's make these something cool so I can be a cool person finally. Like all those guys working at Marvel in the 60s and 70s were all like, they all went to war and stuff and were like He-Man, but they were like the biggest nerds who were like, we're finally cool. We're 40 and we're finally cool. And they're going like college campuses and stuff and like being celebrities.
Yeah, there was a real sense of shame that they then had to turn on their heads and be like, oh, wait, I am a celebrity to some people. All right. And maybe for Barks, it was the same thing too, especially when he got to see how celebrated he was outside of America. And I think that's something too to notice in American comic books. It's not that the funny cartoon animal books don't sell, they do, but they are way below Marvel or DC in consciousness of the comic market, especially in the 60s. So the Barks comics, people enjoyed them in America, but they kind of just fell for the comic fandom of the 60s in America. Marvel and DC were far more important to them than a bunch of funny cartoon books from Disney,
So he retired in 1966. He formally retired in 1966, and he continued to write stories on and off. I believe he wrote all of the Junior Woodchuck comics in the 70s. But he then got a royalty-free license from Disney because I assume he didn't make any royalties off of his comic work.
Not one penny.
His uncredited comic work. So he began to take commissions of oil paintings from fans of their favorite duck scenes, and they're all awesome. Like, look them up online. They are amazing. I don't know how much it would cost to buy one, but now I want a print of one. And there is one actually based on the story that this cartoon we're doing today is based on. So there's a great oil painting of Scrooge and Goldie after the fight scene in the bar, and it's so cool.
Yeah, those paintings are amazing. They're actually featured in the new cartoon.
Really?
They're like redrawn in the backgrounds, and yeah, it's beautiful. But also, the most important thing about those paintings is Disney let him do that. Like, he didn't just sneak around and do that. Disney were like, we really fucked you over. Okay, fine. You can use these characters, and I think it's also that they weren't like, I don't think he was doing prints, so they weren't like massively available. So I think they were also like, yeah, you can paint your weird naked belly dancing ducks and shit that you put in those paintings, and we won't sue the shit out of you.
Yeah, I mean, they were feeling bad for a man in his 70s who needed to live.
I don't want to pretend that a company actually feels bad, but after the 1978 release of Superman, it was much more in the public conscience that the creators of all your favorite things from 40 years ago at the time were all fucked over and robbed by rich people. And they were like living as delivery boys, or just they had no money. And so thanks to people like Neil Adams shaming companies like Disney or DC, they finally started giving a little bit of something to the people they robbed, like 100% just ripped off.
And also Disney took back that license because fans were making unauthorized prints of those paintings. Boom. And they're like, you're making too much money off of this, Carl. Even though I don't
I remember being a kid and like going to like the Camden County Comic Convention, like in a hotel ballroom. And you'd see guys there who are like, oh, this guy created the Green Lantern. And it says that on his thing. And I'm like, why aren't you a millionaire, and he's like hooked up to an oxygen tank in a wheelchair.
I saw that
and
same
stuff.
I saw the same
Yeah.
Green Lantern guy,
And
more
there's no line for him either. Actually, this was not this is not a sad situation, but I was just at the Midwest Gaming Classic doing a Retronauts panel, and one of the guys we talked about on the Darkwing Duck episode, one of the guys who worked on this show, Tad Stones, was there. And before I showed up, I was like, I really want a drawing from him, but there's going to be a huge line, and I won't have time. There was never a line for him, and I was like, "You Philistines!"
The last time I ever saw Darwin Cook, he had no line, and I was like, I don't want to bother him. And now he's dead, and I'll never get to talk to maybe my favorite American comic artist of all time.
God, yeah. I wanted to get on the table and be like, "Don't you know who this man is? He created Darkwing Duck. Stop talking to that streamer. He's nobody."
Well, as I get older, that is when I like Carl Barks books more, when I can really appreciate the artistry. I think it is like an old man thing to espouse the greatness of Carl Barks
Yeah.
and these guys. But
That's when you start getting liver spots.
yeah, but as you get older, you do see how grand artists were robbed by the system, and you want them to get the credit they deserve, and it's very sad that they don't. And so, I mean, Carl Barks' story actually less sad than some other guys out there, you know?
Yeah, at least he was recognized within his lifetime. So let's get to that. So Disney takes the license back. I don't know what he is doing at that point, but in 1981, some influential people in the Hollywood movie industry, like Star Wars producer Gary Kurtz and screenwriter Edward Summer, they spearheaded a collection of Barks stories called Scrooge McDuck: His Life and Times. And Gary Kurtz basically had to buy most of the stake in a publisher to get this published. Like no one would publish this, so he bought a stake in the publisher that eventually published this hardcover collection. So this included a new cover by Barks and a watercolor picture book story called Go Slowly, Sands of Time. And I've seen pictures of that. It seems very melancholy because it's a man in his 80s, like painting an Uncle Scrooge comic. And the one I've seen is like Scrooge in a pile of money, like looking at a clock and a calendar, just like time's a ticking, Scrooge and Carl. Yeah.
Jeez, that's by 81, people were finally his fans, his kids were finally in a positions to truly celebrate him. Like I know Spielberg was very open about like how influential the McDuck adventures were.
Yeah, and George Lucas wrote the foreword to the first newer collection, Only a Poor Old Man.
And these finally let people celebrate him in the way he should have been, like packaging them together, not also treating them like baby comics that are for nobody, you know?
Yeah, this was sold in bookstores. It was like the first real treasury of its kind. It established this format.
Prestige.
Yes.
It gave it prestige.
And it was reviewed in Time and Newsweek and like real periodicals. So they were taking it seriously. They wanted to say, you know, these should be respected. These comics from the past that your mom probably threw out. So
It's still to this day, like the most indignant I get about anything is, you know, it's this is getting weird right now, but like for my whole life, people would be like, "Why are you obsessed with Donald Duck and Scrooge McDuck?" And I have to be like, "Okay, you have to understand that the greatest adventure stories of all time star these characters, and that's the base level." And then now there's like a huge TV show starring one of them, and you go to Target and there are toys of them, and I'm like, this makes me feel weird. This makes me feel like a part of my life is like reaching this culmination of being legitimized in a weird way.
So Barks wrote his final Uncle Scrooge comic, not drawn, of course, in 1994. It was called Horsing Around with History. I believe it was not published in America.
Yeah,
we'll get more into the Scandinavian and European things later, but let's go back to Uncle Scrooge comics. We talked about him getting his own comic in 1952. I believe Barks' original run on Scrooge comics ended in 1967, like sort of around the time he formally retired. This was weird for me to do research about because I didn't know the publication history of the Uncle Scrooge comic. Number one, it's very complex with many different publishers. But number two, it's basically been uninterrupted for the past 60 plus years. Like there's been a few years off here and there, but I found that very strange because as a kid who bought a lot of comics, I never saw an Uncle Scrooge comic in my life. It wasn't until I was in my like teens or 20s when it's like, okay, I've got the internet now. Let's look up everything I've ever loved. And I eventually got to DuckTales. I was like, there were comics. There's been comics for decades. There's a guy named Carl Barks. Nobody told me about any of this. And of course, Carl Barks is not given a credit on DuckTales. He was alive during DuckTales. He liked the first season. But yeah, I had no idea these comics even existed at all. Had no idea.
Yeah, no, I only started hearing about them because in the late 90s when I started reading Comics Journal, which Comics Journal now is a creaky old thing run by old white guys who are mad that people who aren't white are doing comics and aren't men. But Comics Journal in the 80s was a major force in American comics for legitimizing things that are not superheroes and spreading the word. And also they were owned by Fantagraphics, their own publishing arm. So there's kind of a conflict of interest there, actually. But Comics Journal were mega Barks fans, super Barks fans, apostatizing Barks every chance they got. And so every time I'd read about like, well, but this can't compare to a Duck comic, or, oh, you like Bone? Well, you'll really like these Duck comics. You should read them. That finally pushed me to check them out. But I also, as a 17-year-old, like those treasuries were expensive. They didn't publish them in particularly affordable versions.
They still are.
Yep,
the only way to read these, unfortunately, I mean, I know they have to make money.
They do.
But God, I wish they were digital. They're very big, they're very heavy, and very expensive. And it's the only way to read these comics are those Fantagraphics collections, and they're not digital. I'll pay $30 to get a digital file.
Fantagraphics might also have trouble negotiating. They might already have trouble negotiating to publish these from Disney as is. If you bring digital into that, it probably complicates the deal even further with Disney. Because I mean, these comics, they are amazing and great, and many of them truly timeless. There's also some stuff in there that didn't age well.
Much like Tintin.
Yes, and looks bad when your corporate mascot Donald is standing next to a witch doctor, let's say.
Yeah. But I do want to get to, we're still doing the history of Uncle Scrooge comics. So I believe the year is 1986. And Gladstone Comics gets the Uncle Scrooge license. And this is when a little guy named Don Rosa finds out that they're restarting the comics. And he's like, I am, number one, the biggest Carl Barks fan. Number two, the biggest Uncle Scrooge fan. And it's funny to think that this, the new era of Uncle Scrooge comics, which is now over, I think, because his eyeballs fell out, basically. He worked so hard, his retinas detached. But yes, after 1986, these Scrooge comics were written by the biggest Scrooge fan who expanded the history that Barks very carefully laid out. He embellished upon like little things Scrooge mentions. There's an entire 2-volume book, the first of which just was re-released, The Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck. And I was wondering again, like, why did I never see this before? Like, this was out when I was buying comics. I never saw this miniseries. Guess what? Published first in Denmark.
That makes sense.
Those Danish bastards.
I just read Life and Times of Scrooge for the first time. I could talk all day about
really?
it.
I bought it. Didn't have time to read it. It is so dense.
I know.
It is so dense.
It's like reading Watchmen.
It is Watchmen for Scrooge. Like, it's the entire time I was reading it and the foreword by a very fussy Don Rosa telling you the right way to read this, goddammit. But he totally was. When you say he started in 86, I can't not see the parallels with Frank Miller and Alan Moore, who were doing basically this same thing for Batman or Superman. These were the best writers and artists of their time, Alan Moore and Frank Miller. They loved this mythology, but they wanted to modernize it and also make sense of it and stitch things together from the Silver Age or Golden Age comics they read as children. And that's exactly what Don Rosa was doing too, because he cared so much. And he's also a very good draftsman. I think his storytelling is great.
His art is great.
And he captures the feel of the Ducks very well. But also just reading Life and Times of Scrooge, I have not read every Scrooge comic, but I've read enough of the Barks ones to know how he's taking one panel from a Barks comic where Scrooge says, I remember when I did that, and turning that into a whole issue.
He super expands upon all this Klondike stuff that is touched upon in this episode in the comic it's based on. There's a lot of that.
Which printing of it are you reading?
Oh, the new Fantagraphics.
Yeah.
One. That puts it only the 12 issues in a row, because that's how Don Rosa says is the right way to read it. And then you read the untold side stories in the second volume, which haven't been published yet, and I'm waiting for that.
So it's April 2019 now. That first volume just came out, and in October, I believe, the second volume will be out to complete the series, but it definitely comes recommended. And of course, the Fantagraphics Barks collections, which there's 2 of them, or are there more? You lent me 2. I assume there are more.
There's more.
The Barks ones, there's many.
There's many. Well, there's at least 10 Donald ones, and then a number of Scrooge ones too.
They come in these very nice box sets with 2 volumes per box set, which like you said, they're doing for the new Life and Times, which is the 3rd time Life and Times has been published. They're always published in very limited runs. It's the 3rd time it's been published in the last 10 years, and I'm going to have to buy it, and it'll be my 3rd collection of that book, because that is just the greatest comic book ever.
It's a beautiful comic, yeah.
And I love Fantagraphics reprints of the Barks Duck ones, because they don't improve the coloring. They're like, no, these were published on cheap coloring. That
Literally
didn't use-
4-color comics.
Yeah, so-
it's right in the name.
So they look kind of crappy by today's standards of coloring, but it would be way worse if they digitally improve the colors to make them look right and have Donald. It's also, I should mention in the Duck books, an amazing thing about them is that when I read them, I hear every character's voice like I heard them as kids, except for Donald. I cannot hear it in the Donald voice. He gets to say all these things that he can't possibly say in his original
like
cartoon.
the old man's gone cracked, I say.
I have very complicated feelings about Donald's voice. And also, I've heard some things that I don't know if I'm allowed to repeat them, but I will, about Donald's voice.
Let's burn every bridge, Matt.
I have some Donald secrets, but I do want to say about Life and Times before we get off the subject. Like I said, there are 3 modern printings of it. Fantagraphics is great. It's got these backup, this information by Rosa. He writes a little addendum to every issue, including pointing out some Easter eggs and references and stuff. But before Fantagraphics got it, Boom Studios had it about 10 years ago. And they put out the same thing, 2 hardcover volumes, and also a companion, which I don't have and is hundreds of dollars now. And I get very upset about me not buying it when I saw it in a store once. But those hardcovers, if you can get them, they are very expensive and out of print. Have, I think, the best backup information about that I've just about seen of any. Like, it's annotated the way that, like, remember when the movie Watchmen was out and they put out like 10 different books just about Watchmen?
Oh, yeah,
it feels like it's like that. He tells you absolutely every single thing. He tells you every story it's referencing, every issue it's referencing, and they have like visual representations of it, so you know exactly what he's talking about. It's the Boom Studios Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck reprints from, I think, 2009 are just fantastic. And if you can get a hold of them, I highly recommend those.
So we're making good time, folks. We have we're at 30 minutes now in history, so we can talk about the history of DuckTales finally. So DuckTales officially ran from September 18th, 1987 to November 28th, 1990, 100 episodes and a movie. Wow. So prior to this on TV, Disney had done things like The Wuzzles, which was a toy commercial, and then they did Gummy Bears because Michael Eisner's kids came back from summer camp, and apparently at the time, Gummy Bears were a new invention, and they're like, the kids can't get enough of these damn Gummy Bears. Make a Gummy Bear cartoon. And they're like, okay, very nice, rich man. I will do whatever you say. So they make a Gummy Bears cartoon.
So many things that we love about Disney came from Breck Eisner going to Michael Eisner and being like, Dad, I want a ride that's a long flume. And he's like, okay. And they made the greatest ride of all time.
Michael Eisner's kids had a lot of impact on the Disney Corporation at the time. What a bunch of brats. But sometimes
Breck would sit in on meetings and like judge things that the Imagineers would bring in like he was fucking Caesar.
I bet they hated those kids.
There's worse rich kids out there, though. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I gotta say, I gotta give.
He was
it
right.
Eisner.
Breck Eisner's my hero. I love that shitty little teenager that all the Imagineers hated because he led to like my favorite era of Disney.
So again, they did the Wuzzles. They did the Adventures. Disney's The Adventures of the Gummy Bears. I think is the entire full title. Just to let you know. And then there was some bad pilot called Fluppy Dogs. Fluppy Dogs.
That looks like shit.
They're dogs from another
It's
universe.
unwatchable.
Who cares? It's on YouTube, I think.
Yeah, I've tried and I can't get through it.
But the important thing to point out is that these previous series, except for Fluppy Dogs, which I think is just a pilot, they were produced, 13 episodes for Saturday mornings, and eventually with the idea that they would make enough to syndicate later.
So that means it takes 4 years
Yes.
for Gummy Bears to finally be syndicatable. Like, that's forever.
A lot of time. But with this new series, DuckTales, thanks to the spearheading of Michael Eisner, we'll talk a bit more about in this history, the new initiative was like, no, we're not aiming for Saturday mornings. Every kid is home watching TV at like 4 p.m. That's the market we want. And now how do we get enough episodes for 4 p.m. weekdays? We make 65. That will give you
upfront. That is a huge amount of money you have to do upfront for first run syndication.
And instead of a new episode a week for 13 weeks, it's 5 new episodes a week for 13 weeks. So bam, right off the bat.
Michael Eisner was the Tyler Perry of his day.
Yes. It was a ballsy move. So right off the bat, spending a ton of money. And at the time, Disney was not post Little Mermaid Disney. Michael Eisner was like, we need more product to merchandise. We don't make a movie every year. This is not the 90s. So we need things on TV.
This is the Dark Ages where they're still figuring out, like, that's a whole other podcast about the Dark Ages of their featured department. We talked a little bit about that on Secret of Nim, how they, Don Bluth took a lot of, cratered their department when he started his new studio. So they were already in their rebuilding phase there. And also, we talked about this a bit on like the Macross one, or sorry, Robotech. The 80s, early 80s animation on television was a gutter, like garbage, like the worst. Filmation, Hanna-Barbera, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, the worst things.
If something was on the air and it was good, it was quickly removed. Like, I think the only thing of this caliber, and it's not really that good, was the New Adventures of Mighty Mouse. It was sort of like a brief glimmer of hope in the terrible, terrible landscape of Saturday morning cartoons.
Thank you, Ralph Bakshi.
Yes. And
no one else. Nope.
Yeah, no one else worked on that cartoon, just him. So we can thank Eisner because, again, for as much as we don't like executives, sometimes they can kick ass. And Michael Eisner is an odd man, I'll say, a very non-charismatic man. I suffered through a lot of his TV appearances in the 80s. But I will say he came in and said, we are goddamn Disney. We need to be kicking ass. We need to be a prestige product. All of our characters that people like are locked up on the Disney Channel. We need to flood the market with quality animation so people will be like, oh, Disney equals good things. Let's buy DuckTales shit.
I would, if I had to pick between him and Bob Iger, I'd pick him because I think Iger he comes off as kind of bloodless. At least Michael Eisner feels excited to do things, even if they're bad, or he cancels things I like.
So this debuted, as I said earlier on this podcast, as a TV movie called The Treasure of the Golden Suns. And I believe it aired in prime time. I couldn't find an actual evidence of it being in prime time, like a TV listing, but I remember it being a special nighttime thing where if you're a kid, you would remember when a cartoon was on at night in the 80s.
Well, they'd have to buy it per market anyway in the syndication days. Like I do remember watching the hour premiere of like Darkwing or Goof Troop in prime time. So that was just Disney's practice. It probably was part of the syndication package they were already selling of like, and when a new thing premieres, we can buy evening time. Who is watching on the evenings in your market other than children on Fridays,
Yeah. And this really is the start of DuckTales. Like, they're not the first 5 production episodes, but they set up the story like
it's the origin.
Yeah, like why Donald Duck is out of the show, how Scrooge meets Launchpad, the first big adventure post, old man stage of his life. And it's if you're going to watch episodes beyond the one we're doing for this cartoon, I recommend just get those 5 on Amazon or just buy the first season for like $8. They are a really good setup to this world. And I was going back, it is a dated show, but I was surprised how sophisticated the storytelling is. Especially compared to the trash that surrounded it.
Trash.
They trusted children to understand like implications and things to pay off and things like that.
I found a taping of this airing from, it seemed like prime time, of all 5 episodes, which means it only plays the theme once and just plays it like it's a 2-hour episode with all the original commercials intact and like VHS skipping and stuff. That's for me the best way to watch it if you can find someone who uploaded an old VHS, including commercials that were like Ronald McDonald eating a salad, and he's like, a salad at McDonald's, and it's the best 1987 commercials. And I know it's the first airing because it's like tonight the premiere of DuckTales, and it's like come back Saturday morning, and it's on some Fox affiliate.
Okay,
in the
cool.
middle of nowhere. It's really awesome.
So again, I was very surprised by how sophisticated the show was because I watched the movie that was cut up into 5 parts, made into separate episodes. And at the beginning of each episode, it's not like previously on DuckTales. It's just like they just start the episodes like, you remember what happened, don't you?
But they are written at least well enough that if they aired out of order, you aren't totally confused as a kid, except for El Capitan, perhaps maybe confuse you a little bit.
Yes, that's true.
But he's a mysterious figure. He's a
dangerous Spaniard, as DuckTales would teach us. So
I love that. I totally forgot that right in the middle. Because, we'll get into my issues with the original DuckTales show, but right in the middle, there is a Launchpad, Scrooge, Donald, straight up 3 grown dudes in like an Aztec tomb adventure, and it's amazing.
Yeah, the 3rd episode is really good. I want to go over the animation history really quick. We'll talk about like the Donald Duck dilemma in this series. So animation is by Tokyo Movie Shinsha. Abbreviated as TMS because Tokyo was scary if you're living in 1987. And I read an LA Times article about this series launching. It's from 1987. And dear Lord, the hand-wringing. They're tiptoeing up to the line of casual racism. They're not quite crossing it, but they're just like, Walt Disney would be spinning in his grave to know this animation was being outsourced. And it's like, they're talking about how, like, can Japan really animate these classic characters? And then there's like statements by Disney which are slightly racist, which are like, these people work so hard. They work hard. They sleep under their desk. These Japanese people are hard workers. The downside of negative stuff, positive stereotypes, rather.
Yeah. Well, so I can see it. The only non-racist reading I can see of this is of animation fans in the 80s being such traditionalists of just like, this in-between work, layout, all of the grunt work of animation used to all be done in America, and the fact that it's being outsourced cheaper is a bad thing. It just feels worse. I mean, but also like Disney animated worse looking things than DuckTales before DuckTales came out.
That is true. And I will say, like, number one, I understand the anxiety because Saturday morning cartoons were terrible. And to hear that Disney is bringing back classic characters to animate in that style or with that budget, you would be a little upset. But also, Americans were just dealing with the idea of their, they were dealing with the misery of their jobs being taken away by outsourcing. Like the 70s and the 80s were the era of globalization in terms of manufacturing jobs and things like that. So it's just like, oh, the Japanese are doing this now. Like, I can see the anxiety there. So in a way, I do kind of understand it, but it's like, I wish they weren't so worried.
Well,
I want to make an announcement on the podcast. While we're recording this, I just bought a piece of Scrooge McDuck merchandise.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah.
What those fretting people didn't realize was they hit the fucking jackpot with TMS. Like, at that time, they were fucking making Akira. You couldn't get a better overseas studio to animate things.
Yeah.
Like Disney, like their Renaissance stuff, they're at highest budget, like fucking Aladdin or Lion King, still can't really reach some of the technical like impressiveness of the animation of Akira. That's how fucking good TMS was. And they were like these we suck off TMS every episode on the show.
We really do.
But
it's a common theme.
Like by the time they got to DuckTales, for 20 years they had been honed as masters of action comedy and like trained under Hayao Miyazaki, who worked there for years, who through his like screaming at people got them to be the best animators they could be, especially at comedic action that you'll see if you love DuckTales, watch every Lupin show that premiered before DuckTales because all the shit is in there
sure.
too.
Yes.
And Sherlock Hound also, like it's all there. So this was the perfect studio they could get. Like this is not fucking Don Yang or any of the cheapo Korean houses that I'm not being mean to Korea, sorry. But any of the cheapo houses that like Marvel Productions was using. This was not this was TMS.
They chose a prestige studio with a high budget. And it's a shame that all of these people that worked on the show in Japan are just pasted over with one credit, TMS. Because in terms of artists on the show, there are certain roles that were all done in Japan. So like in the credits of the show, you'll see people listed for storyboard and character design, but layout and timing and all that important stuff, all done in Japan. Like director, who directed these episodes? Japanese people. Which one? Like who is my favorite DuckTales director? I don't know because it's just like the Carl Barks thing. They're not credited.
Yeah, again.
Yeah, it'd be scary if we saw a Japanese name in the credits of a kid's cartoon. They're already making my kid's freaking boombox, and he's listening to that thing all the time.
And the damn video games.
Yeah.
It is sort of like the good duck artist problem when I was a kid. Okay, these episodes look better than those. Watch the credits. Okay, I like TMS. I like Star Tunes. I hate Kennedy. I'm okay with ACOM. They can be okay.
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
but it's just like that's how we learn.
If you want to watch those 5 original episodes, anyone who's listening, if you don't feel like watching all of them, just go to the last couple scenes of the last episode when the tomb they're in, made of gold, is falling apart, and every single brick is being pushed out toward them, and that's not CG. Those are lines drawn by a person.
There's a reason.
It's feature quality. It looks amazing.
There's a reason they include that shot in the opening of them like scrambling across the gold bricks as they're crumbling beneath them. It's so cool. But yeah, I wonder, like you mentioned Lupin the Third, I wonder if anyone who worked on DuckTales is working on the new Lupin series, because I know that the guy who directed the Animaniacs TMS episodes, he is the lead director on the new Lupin series, which is amazing to think about.
I would bet there has to be a bit of crossover, though what happened with TMS, DuckTales and its success got TMS more work than they could handle, and they also kind of priced themselves up. Like I believe it's the first 52 are all TMS of DuckTales, and after that, it's multiple different studios. And TMS,
that's insane.
And TMS, they were the best animators on Tiny Toons, on Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, Batman, Gargoyles. They were always the best, but over the 30 years, they got bought by Sega, Sammy. They kind of went through a brain drain. Also, Disney looted many of their best artists to create Walt Disney's TV Animation Japan.
So the show, there's a lot of people behind it. I mentioned Tad Stones was part of it as well. It was developed by Jim Magon, who started in Disney's Children's Records division and soon found his way in their television animation department when that was being revamped for things like, again, the Wuzzles was the first. Who can remember the Wuzzles? Nobody cares. But he had a hand in mostly every Disney tune for TV up until Quack Pack. And he was one of the 3 writers on a Goofy movie, which we did for What a Cartoon Movie back in March. So, he's one of 3 screenwriters on that amazing movie. People really turned out for that movie, our discussion about it at least. Not in the box office, but they really liked our podcast about it.
It's a Disney movie that's written and has a script. Who'd have thunk that would make it the best one of those?
It's a one thing they don't need to try again, definitely.
Yes, I agree.
We should, because they were sending it to France, right? So they were like, well, we better write it so they don't make up some French bullshit. And then they made it into a fucking actual movie. Who'd have thunk it?
And then they closed that studio right after.
As punishment for doing good work. But let's talk about Donald Duck. So number 1, Donald Duck is the next most important character in the Uncle Scrooge comic. Uncle Scrooge was introduced in a Donald Duck comic. The 2 characters are very tied closely together, but he is not in this series very much. In fact, in the first episode, he is shipped off to the Navy to see the world, and that explains how Scrooge takes custody of the nephews. In the comic, Scrooge is not the constant babysitter. Donald is usually hanging out with the nephews with Scrooge. He's usually the other adult there, and they're all working together to trick Scrooge or to help him or do something.
They don't want tragedy in there, but I mean, they lightly imply, and Don Rosa went into it a little bit more of the kids don't have a mother, and Donald is basically their caretaker, and then he brings them into contact with his rich uncle, who he kind of hates or learns to like eventually, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Scrooge would hire Donald to help him. He really was
for little pay.
An employee.
Yes.
Yeah, for 10 cents an hour, he would hire him to come and do everything. He just needed another pair of hands for a lot of this stuff, and you don't want to get some other random contractor. You want to get your nephew that you can totally take advantage of.
Trust and exploit them. So basically, they had to lobby Michael Eisner because Michael Eisner wanted their characters back on TV. Uncle Scrooge was just unimportant enough to be on TV. So Tad Stones, who created Darkwing Duck and worked on everything basically up until a certain point, one of the first things he pitched was Mickey and the Space Pirates. But they were like, no, Mickey Mouse is not a TV character. He's too important for that. Even Donald Duck was considered too important, but he was such part of the Uncle Scrooge universe. So number 1, they had to lobby to get him on the show. But number 2, they did not want him on the show because if you play Kingdom Hearts, you can't understand what Donald Duck is saying. Outside of Popeye mutterings, he's not meant to have dialogue.
Yeah.
In animation.
That is a real problem in the life of Donald, that the voice he uses is so funny to hear in a 6-minute short, especially when he's like, I'm not going to
Please don't. No one do that.
When he says off fooey or rats a frats, and when he's mad, you're not supposed to really know what he's saying. Or even when he said goodbye, boys. But he's not supposed to say more than 20 words or give plot important information.
Yes.
But when you just read words on a page in a Barks comic, it doesn't you just read it and you hear it in your head and you're not obfuscating it with junky words.
I don't read it in a duck voice, by the way, when I read him in the comics. He's just a man.
Yeah,
he's just a man.
He's a duck man.
I have trouble figuring out what he should sound like. And I actually I've had conversations with this with people often in my life. That Tony's great and Clarence Nash was great, but it might be time to just entirely retire that voice if they want Donald to be a character. Yes. Although I do on the new I like the idea that they try and make him into actually a silent character. He is kind of a character who doesn't need to speak and speaks with his actions or with his emotions and his face. And I think they don't play on that enough. And if they did, that would justify it a little more. But then they also, in the new show, there was an episode where for half an episode, he talks like Don Cheadle, which I also think is maybe the correct way to go. Maybe just make him sound like Don Cheadle forever now.
Yeah. I mean, in the few episodes he's in, I found myself rewinding to be what did Donald Duck say? And I thought I was Mr. Clever Cartoon Man, where it's just like, just by context, I figured out, like, well, of course, Donald's not on the series because he's just so hard to understand. He comes back in episode 3, and that is the joke. People are like, what? What are you saying? And
That happens in the new show a lot, too. When he sounds like Don Cheadle, Mrs. Beakley says something like, is he always saying things like that? And he says something like, smart.
That's very self-aware for a 1987 cartoon to just examine, like, why does this character talk like this? Can you
Why do we
imagine?
all accept this?
Yeah, can you imagine him being the star of the show? And I love how dismissive, especially Launchpad. Launchpad hates Donald. Launchpad replaces Donald, but he also hates him. Just like, I hate this guy. I don't understand him. I'm going crazy because I'm starting to understand him.
The creation of Launchpad is a major necessity for the show because you do need another adult there with the kids, and he can kind of play the Donald role, but also do things that like Donald can't fly a plane, neither can Launchpad.
But he can safely crash a plane.
Yes,
That's important to note.
it's a true Launchpad landing.
I love the characterization of Launchpad in that episode because first because he shows up, he's like, he knows he's a bad pilot and stuff, but he's not like as dumb as he would become. And I think he's like the perfect level in that episode where he's like, yeah, whatever, let's do this. Like he seems he's almost more Brock Sampson-y than Launchpad-y.
Yeah,
and I like when he picks up Donald with that big claw on the plane, and then Donald starts screaming at him, and he's like, "Oh no, did I grab him by the throat?" Like he's at first like nice to Donald, then he's like, "Man, this guy's fucking annoying."
Well, everybody gets Flanderized over time, though, in
That's
DuckTales
true.
for sure.
And by the way, as we pointed out before, Launchpad in Darkwing Duck is a different character from different universe. This Launchpad has a different personality, actually. Like when Tad Stones was developing Darkwing Duck, he said that in DuckTales, Launchpad feels like he should be the star of the show. When I was watching these episodes, I was like, yeah, Launchpad is very cocky and very like upset about the situations he's put in by Scrooge. But in Darkwing Duck, he's like, duh, sure, Mr. What's he called? Oh,
DW.
DW, yeah, not Mr.
DW.
McD.
Yeah.
But
in the new series, it's like in the middle of that. I really like his characterization in the new series. And also, Beck Bennett is like not the best voice actor, but is so well cast that, I mean, in real life, he is a Launchpad. He looks just like Launchpad McQuack, and he's very funny on the show.
It's perfect casting, yeah.
Yeah, he's not in the show that much. He pretty much like takes them to the place and then disappears most of the time.
Beck Bennett's a busy man.
He does have his own episodes.
So some final facts as we wrap up this history segment. We're hitting an hour almost, but so it was budgeted for $275,000 per episode.
Whoa,
a ton of money. I mean, in terms of 87 money, go back in time. It's probably close to $750,000 now.
That's
guessing.
pretty good, actually. Yeah.
It's more than like Steven Universe gets.
And
a season, probably.
They had to spend a lot of money because the yen was very powerful compared to the dollar. So they were paying I think it was like 200 plus yen to the dollar or something like that.
That's why the Robotech guy said they couldn't do the second season because the yen got too powerful in like 1986 that they couldn't afford him anymore, which that sounds both believable and like an excuse for Carl McKeck or Harmony Gold to be cheap.
That is true, yes. Yeah. But this was the highest rated animated program of 1987, presumably of 1988. Like, they got what they paid for. If you think about what TV was back then, there was cable. Not everyone had it, so there were basically 3 or 4 channels, and that meant like a third of the market could be watching DuckTales at 4 p.m. every day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and
it was millions of people, whereas today it's like hundreds of thousands, maybe.
Well, and it had it was like the Sopranos of animation at its time. Like it was the first prestige kids animated series, and it then inspired a million other shows to follow it to also be the prestige animation. And eventually it all kind of like thins out and everybody pretending they're as prestigious as DuckTales while not really spending the money. Just like how Netflix has 800 shows that pretends they're prestige and they're all cheap and bad.
They just have a glossy like film filter and they cut frames. Like it looks like a movie. So again, this ended in 1990. There was a movie by the Disney Toon Studios called DuckTales the Movie, Treasure of the Lost Lamp. I did see this in theaters as a big DuckTales fan.
Yeah.
Watching clips, the animation looks bad.
It does.
It's not as good as the TV show, which is weird.
I've always thought that, and people will like argue with me, and I'm like, look at it now, because it's made by the Goofy movie people, and you think it'll look like a Goofy movie, and it really doesn't.
Well, Disney Toons, it was their first feature, so there probably were just a lot of kinks to translate that into feature production. Also, I mean, you've got this was the thing that happened with Goofy movie too. when you go from the television department to the film department, you're getting a lot more executives in your fucking ear with their opinions because you're dealing with people who aren't your usual friends in that position.
So this movie, I did see it. I saw clips of it online, and it just I was so used to being in the TMS mindset where the TMS characters are very solidly built. They're very just like well defined anatomically. Like they're just, you can feel their shapes and things like that. In the movie, things are like slippery sloppery. Like everything's jiggling around, and it's just a little too. I'm gonna say a little too fluid.
Yeah,
I'm just used to the limited frame rate, but very well defined drawings of like the Japanese draftsmanship that I'm used to seeing in things like DuckTales.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't. I had the tape as a kid, and I barely watched it. Like it was low. Well, also it just made me sad. Like I think it makes me feel sad that like all of when Scrooge loses all of his stuff, it like gets melted by magic or whatever. I'm like, oh, I'm sad. He liked all that stuff. He gets it back in the end, and everything's
It's
fine.
happy ending, and
it made me sad.
Rip Taylor as a genie, a wacky genie in a Disney movie. Who would have thought?
Like they were working on Aladdin when they were making this movie.
Would be. Yeah,
That's also, I'm surprised they even got authorization to do a genie story.
Another genie, another lost lamp. Jeez. So before we get on to the episode here, I want to talk about the voice cast. So number one, the one true Scrooge in my life. There will never be another Scrooge to replace him. Alan Young, born Angus Young. He is as Scottish as the tartan that Scrooge wears. So Alan Young, you might know him best as playing Wilbur from Mr. Ed. You probably don't know him from playing Wilbur because you are not as old as us, or you didn't waste your life watching Nick at Night.
Yeah, exactly. But man, what a fun guy, Wilbur.
Yes, but Alan Young, a veteran performer, like many men of his age, started in radio. He had one of like the first TV shows, The Alan Young Show.
Wow.
And at this point in his life, he was in his, I believe, late 50s or early 60s, and he was doing a lot of voice work. Of course, he voiced Scrooge in Disney Christmas Carol, or Mickey's Christmas Carol.
Yeah, I think it's Mickey's
Christmas
Carol.
I believe that was his first role as Scrooge. Scrooge also appears in Sport Goofy, but played by a different person entirely.
Boo, doesn't count.
But yes, Alan Young, so good. The perfect Scrooge, the perfect Scottish accent. There's a lot of heart to his voice, a lot of warmth to his voice, and he would go on to do this voice and a lot of things. I'm thinking of he plays a character twice in Ren and Stimpy for a failed backdoor pilot, Haggis McHaggis.
Oh, yeah.
You've never heard a 70-plus-year-old man scream like a Ren and Stimpy character like you have in the Haggis McHaggis cartoons. Please watch them. They are so great.
It's elder abuse, though, on a certain level, isn't it?
Maybe. He seems like totally game for it, though.
Yeah.
Like, he played the character twice. He was willing to be a character in a series if they brought the series. But man, it is sort of like the Ren and Stimpy version of Scrooge, where it's like about a miserly Scotsman, but he just beats everyone with a cane.
Which is a horrible stereotype.
Yes.
We should talk about that.
I guess, yeah, Scrooge is rooted in Scottish stereotypes. Back when they weren't officially white people.
I guess. I mean, I don't know. English people are going to have to tell me how they feel about like Scotch racism. The only ever time I've seen jokes about Scotch racism was in Gareth Marenghi's Dark Place, where he wrote an entire episode about how much he fears and hates the Scottish people, and they talk about how racist that was in the 80s.
Yeah, I didn't know that Scottish people were, that a thing about them is that they're supposedly cheap. Until long after I was a Scrooge McDuck fan and someone told me that, and I was like, oh man, I had no idea. But I guess we've all just like we don't care anymore about that, I guess, because Scrooge is allowed to still be cheap.
Like, he's like a living racial joke, basically.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like 25% Scottish. I don't care.
I'm all kinds of white. I'm sure it's fine.
We're all white.
Yeah.
But yeah, Alan...
we also skipped over Scrooge McDuck and Money, didn't we? No, it was a short in 1967. It was the first animated appearance of Scrooge McDuck.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yes, please,
Yeah.
Matthew, tell me more. This is one thing I missed in my research.
It was the first one where he spoke, and it's a very boring short about economics where he teaches
hate
Huey, Dewey, and
those
Louie
ones.
about saving your money.
Damn.
Yeah, but he also, I think before that, though, is the intro to the Mickey Mouse Club, where he appears as one of, like, hundreds of characters are in that opening, and he's one of them. Okay. And it was like a fun thing. It was more like an Easter egg to be like, oh, Scrooge McDuck from the comic books. And also there's a short where Donald has like his inside spirits are talking to him, and one of them is an old Scottish man that some people consider like kind of a Scrooge nod. That was also from the 50s or 60s, but it's not really. So I don't even
It's more of a
know.
Scottish joke than anything. Like, yeah.
Yeah. It was just showing like, hey, Donald comes from somewhere. I think it was just saying like Donald's kind of Scottish. But yeah, Scrooge McDuck and Money is the first voice performance of Scrooge, where he's played by some random Disney voice actor. Oh no, he's played by Bill Thompson, who played Droopy.
Oh,
was
okay,
Scrooge.
okay,
Ah.
interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting piece of like history, but it's not fun or good or anything.
No, I
but
hated
then
I hated those educational ones. They were always like,
Yeah, like
this
cut
is-
back to Ludwig von Drake. He's funny.
yeah, exactly. It was kind of that. It was kind of like instead of Ludwig von Drake in this one, we'll have Scrooge show up. But then
happened that Von Drake
Yeah.
doesn't show up that much these days. What
he's in the new DuckTales show.
Oh man,
A lot of characters are in that one.
Well, yes, but anyway,
Yeah.
sorry,
Yes.
Alan Young.
He's in my spec for the new DuckTales show. If anyone wants to read that.
We are running out of time, folks. So Alan Young, amazing. I could talk about him forever. He is the best Scrooge. I'm sure the new one is very good. I've heard clips
He
of
is
him.
very good,
I have to get
yeah.
used to him. I mean,
Yeah.
Alan Young, he voiced Scrooge as recently as 2012's DuckTales Remastered. I will say it's not a great game, but it's worth it to just hear new lines of dialogue from Alan Young, from June Foray before both of them died.
Yeah.
Really right after
Yeah.
that game.
They were a bit wheezy, but they're still good. They're still good.
Still good.
But David Tennant is a true Scotsman as well.
true, yeah.
So
And he's fucking fantastic. He is like, I remember when they were announcing the new show, I was like, there's no possible way I'll be happy with whoever they pick. And even Kassir, I was like, he's fine. I guess he'll be in the new one, whatever. And then when they put out that video revealing the whole cast of them singing the DuckTales theme, and it's like, it saves Tennant for last, I was like, okay, you got, like my heart was filled with so much joy to be like, they picked the one guy on the planet who could follow in the footsteps of the greatest voice for Scrooge.
And everyone else at the time was just like the murderer's row of voice actors. So Russi Taylor, number one, who plays, of course, Martin Prince on The Simpsons. I have to credit her for making a duck voice you can understand.
It's
Yeah.
pretty impressive.
It's a
Like,
good invention.
I mean, and she was already in the Mickey Clubhouse as Minnie, so then she, like, these voices are secondary to her Minnie stuff, but she's really good at them. And yeah, even though they all are the same voice, they are intelligible, which the nephews are not in their original short appearances either.
People like Frank Welker and Jim Cummings, like anyone that was doing a voice in the 80s was on DuckTales.
A little too much Frank Welker for my taste, honestly. Like it just kind of, I love Frank Welker. I don't want to be mean to him, but his voices stand out so much. I'm like, dude, you have 4 voices. You have your Scooby voice, your Fred voice, your whiny voice, and your dumb voice. Like,
and Slimer.
Okay, Slimer too.
Don't
And a
forget
poo.
Slimer. And
Or
a
a boo.
A poo? Oh, a boo. Okay, yeah.
Abu,
A
yeah.
boo, sorry.
And every animal noise. But yeah, and like so old timers like Alan Young and June Foray and also all the people that were doing voices at the time.
It was some of Jim Cummings' first work. Like he's
Yeah, he's in the first episode that aired.
You can totally see you can totally see the producers falling in love with him on DuckTales. They're like his level of involvement just grows and grows and grows until they finally just make 2 shows in a row that star him.
Before we get to the actual episode, Matt, you've been watching a lot of DuckTales 2017. I'll give you 90 seconds. Sell us on this.
I'm caught up. I try and watch all the kid shows on now, like Craig of the Creek and Steven and stuff, and I think it's the best one. That's like all I'll say is it's the best one. It has deep references to duck canon and lore to the point that when I watch this show, I feel like Disney just made a show for me. Like Frank Angonez and all these guys just got together and made a TV show specifically with me in mind, and they didn't care about anyone else in the world, and I thank them for it.
I have watched a handful of episodes too. My short opinion is that my feelings on it are the total reverse of how I feel about 87 DuckTales, which is it is better writing, better characterization, funnier, more respect for Barks, a truly fantastic cast of actors, both famous and not famous. The negatives, I will say, and this is not a knock on the animators who are doing great work, they do not have the budget from Disney XD that this show had, and it looks a little flatter than these classic ones do. And it's like they're doing their best with the animation they have, but the animation is kind of a letdown. But I know that is what television animation in America looks like now, and it's just part of the deal. Like
I will say, just get deeper in. They
I've
get
seen
more
some
room
action
to stretch.
scenes that look really good, but
Yeah.
there's sometimes where I'm like, there's a few Bojacky moments in the show. that
Bojack.
I'm like- but again, amazing, right? I really do love the show too, but I have to be critical. I can't not be.
Yeah, that turned
It
me
is
off
the
initially.
best tell. I have such trouble formulating this, but we're actually going to do a podcast about it on the Adult Swim Patreon. The best way to sell it is it's Venture Brothers for kids, in the sense that like it's an adult cartoon with all the same themes of the Venture Brothers, except with positivity. And the only thing that keeps it from being like an adult show is nobody swears. Like everything else is totally no holds barred. It is just exactly what you want a show to be. For me.
Well, I'm sure we'll get around to doing an episode about that at some point soon.
Oh, certainly.
But for now, after the break, we're going to get back and talk about the episode Back to the Klondike.
Life is like a hurricane here in Duckburg. Race cars, lasers, aeroplanes. It's a duck blur. Might solve a mystery or rewrite history. DuckTales, woo! Every day they're out there making DuckTales, woo! Tales of daring, do bad, and good DuckTales. Danger! Watch behind you. There's a stranger out to find you. What to do? Just grab onto some DuckTales, woo! Every day they're out there making DuckTales, woo! Tales of daring, do bad, and good DuckTales, woo! Not ponytails or cotton tails, no DuckTales, woo!
No time for stealing, Beagle Boy. We're making movies. Lights, camera, DuckTales!
Here comes the magic and adventure that is pure Disney. As your fine feathered friends drop by for non-stop action and excitement.
More! I want to see more!
It's coming your way in the 2-hour world premiere of DuckTales.
Disney Magic. Tonight at 8 on Fox 11.
Hey, everybody. This is one of the hosts of What a Cartoon, Bob Mackey. Hope you're enjoying our episode about DuckTales. I just want to clarify, it's not about ponytails or cottontails. We're talking about DuckTales. The theme song makes that very clear. Who's here with me today?
Look behind you. There's a stranger, and it's Henry Gilbert. Hi.
This show is all about stranger danger.
Thanks for listening, guys, and big thank you to Matthew J. for being our duck expert on here. If only we had, this could have been an hour longer just to make space for all of his duck knowledge.
We had to have some degree of self-control, but we will soon in the future, I won't say soon because we don't know, in the future at some point I do want to do an episode about DuckTales 2017.
It'll happen.
Yeah.
By the end of this year, I let the word go forth. It will happen.
Matthew J. has sold me on it, but we're here to tell you all the wonderful, wonderful things you can get if you subscribe to the Talking Simpsons Network at just $5 a month. Frankly, Henry, it's a duck blur.
Yes, you'll feel richer than Scrooge McDuck in content if you sign up at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. Why, for just $5 a month, you'll get to hear next week's What a Cartoon podcast right now and with no ads. And the same goes for Talking Simpsons. You'll hear next week's right now. And that's just where it starts.
Yes, you'll have a veritable money bin's worth of podcasts to swim around in. Boy,
3 cubic acres.
I'm getting sweaty from these metaphors. Or are they analogies? I don't know. They're analogies. But yes, we have so many, dozens and dozens of bonus podcasts, things like exclusive series, like Talking Futurama, Talking Critic, the currently unfurling Talking of the Hill. So many interviews. We also have monthly community podcasts you can listen to and contribute to, end of season wrap-ups and deleted scene specials, and just occasionally on a whim we'll do a bonus podcast if we want to do it. There's just so much there. We've been doing the Patreon for almost 2 years, so that's almost 2 years worth of content you might not have heard. And if you like our voices, and I assume you do, you've been with us for this long, you might want to hear so many bonus podcasts we've done, including the What a Cartoon movie podcast. Henry, what's that all about?
Well, if you go up to the $10 and up level and really start living large, don't be a tightwad like Scrooge McDuck. At $10 and up, you will not only get access to all of our previous $10 and up videos, but for the last 6 months, we have been doing our What a Cartoon movie podcast, where we give the same What a Cartoon treatment, but to an animated feature film for even longer. Me and Bob chat for over 3 hours on films like Akira, Kiki's Delivery Service, Batman Mask of the Phantasm, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Secret of NIMH, and if you're a real Disney afternoon head, I think you will want to pay that $10 just to hear me and Bob talk about a Goofy movie.
It was a very, very popular choice.
Yes.
That brought a ton of people to that Patreon tier.
Everybody enjoyed it. I mean, who can say no to the siren rhythms of Powerline?
Exactly.
No one.
I love it. But yes, it's all waiting for you at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. You can be smarter than the Smarties by signing up today. But now we'll get back to DuckTales in the episode Back to the Klondike. So we're back with the episode Back to the Klondike. And if you're looking for this episode, it is on Amazon Prime in season 2.
102? Or
I think it's like 201.
They're marked weird.
They're like season 101, 201, 301. I don't know why. There's like 5 or 6 groupings of seasons. They're not really seasons.
But, well, this was in the first production run, like, too.
This is the first production episode, which I did not know.
Oh, I didn't know that
when
either.
choosing it. I chose it because it's an adaptation of a Bark story, and it also delves into Scrooge's past.
You know, that some more adult moments in this make sense that they got away with it in a first production episode as opposed to later ones. Like how in the first production episode of Batman the Animated Series, they had blood that they'd never get to do again on the show.
Yeah, I mean, when I was scanning through this episode while deciding if we should do it, I noticed there's a lot of real guns. Lots of guns being shot at people, lots of guns being pointed at people. The danger of being murdered by guns is all over this episode, and that's why I loved it.
Yes.
So this episode is actually the Valentine's Day episode, but I'm sure it aired like in... actually, it first aired on October 28th, 1987, just in time for Halloween, the Valentine's Day episode of DuckTales. I'm sure at some point in history it eventually lined up with Valentine's Day.
That's why you need Webby to tell you up front, like, it's almost Valentine's Day, Uncle Scrooge. Webby's slightly annoying.
Webby is the too cute kid.
I don't want to be too mean to Webby. I really love Kate McCucci's Webby. She is way better than the current Webby, or the Webby of 87.
She's very much
She is the protagonist of the show.
Yeah.
And they make her like the best character on the show, whereas Webby and Mrs. Beakley in the original show totally suck. And I don't like either of them or like seeing them on screen.
They're just designed to be kidnapped. Actually, I was watching DuckTales commercials. Yeah. And one was about Webby. It's a commercial of the time, and it's like, she's the cutest damsel in distress you'll ever see. Like, that was her role in the show, to be kidnapped.
Jeez.
And to be cute. But this is
and her voice is super annoying. And in the new show, she's like, I think this show, like, I think the writers of the show, like, can see me and are stealing my life, because the character of Webby is like, in the first episode, Huey, Dewey, and Louie are like, our dumbass Uncle Donald, and she's like, Donald Duck is the greatest adventurer of all time. And then she shows them her like Scrooge McDuck collection. And I was watching it, and I remember just like tears spilling down my face at that scene.
So in this episode, it is Valentine's Day, and everyone is making Valentines, but Uncle Scrooge obviously is very curmudgeonly about Valentine's Day. He says it's a waste of time and postage stamps. And this is when Huey, Dewey, and Louie, in search of more glue, discover Uncle Scrooge in his one of his many secret closets, looking at an old Valentine.
Say, Huey, have you got any more glue? No, but I think I know where we can find some. Oh, come on. There's nothing in that dusty old closet but mothballs.
Hello, kids. I was just checking to see if any change fell out of my pockets.
Uncle Scrooge, I thought you said Valentines were a waste of stamps.
They are. This old Valentine was hand-delivered to me on a mountaintop, back when my wallet was as skinny as my legs. Back when I was a prospector in the days of the great Klondike gold rush.
And that brings us to our flashback. And what I love about Alan Young's performance is that in the TV series, Scrooge needs to be a lot more likable than he is in the comic. And he gives the character a lot more warmth. There's a lot more range than seemingly like the angry, screaming Scrooge from the comic. Although there are moments of sentimentality, especially in the comic version of this story.
There is some, but it's Scrooge is much more in denial about his feelings.
Yeah.
He hates, Scrooge in the comics hates that he feels something for any human being, honestly, and that he's constantly fighting his emotions.
And we'll talk about the original comic because I assume that we all read that for this. Okay, yeah. I did right before we did the recording. It is very loosely based on it. Like, some of the bigger plot points are based on the comic, but I will say that they do a lot to make Goldie, the character, more likable and to make her intentions more pure. I think it's just like, we can't have this scheming evil woman. It's 1987. So yes, we get the setup of Scrooge. Even though he's warmer in the series, he is still a total badass. I love the line, I don't know which was wilder in those days, the wolves or me. So he's like digging gold up from where he buried it, and there are wolves about to pounce on him. He turns around and starts like growling at them, and the wolves back away. So Uncle Scrooge, in the comic version of the story, he's even more of a badass. Like, he beats up an entire bar's worth of people, but they still try to make him as much of a badass as they can in 1987 for TV.
Why I like that Scrooge in his stories, he tells these things that like Donald's like, no way, that's not true. And then when they go to the places, he does all the things like, oh, I guess he wasn't lying the whole time. And in the Don Rosa, he did a lot of White Agony Creek stuff. White Agony Creek is a major place they return to a ton in Duck comics from what I've seen. And I also, in that clip, it confirmed for me that it all just sounds like one person talking to themselves when Huey, Dewey, and Louie speak.
It really is, yes, and it's accurate. I mean, in Quack Pack, of course, and in the new series, they all have different personalities. But just as in the comic, they're written to have one hive mind. In the comic, they often like all their dialogue fills one balloon, and they each say the different part of a sentence.
In one review, I saw them described as a Greek chorus, which I think they really are for Bark stuff. Yeah,
it's very sophisticated.
The Yukon in the comics is basically, it's essentially where he first made his fortune, or at least like the nugget that would become his fortune.
The goose egg nuggets.
The Badass Scrooge is my favorite. It's like my favorite thing to show people who don't understand Scrooge, especially the page in Life and Times where he collapses a giant steamboat like with his fork. He's strapped to the two stacks of a steamboat down like in the bowels of the boat, and he just gets so pissed that he just pulls his arms hard enough that the boat fucking like crunches together and falls apart.
But of course, on 1987 animation, he can't be that violent. So there's more like shoving in this and like goofery of it. I also do like that they stick him as like, no, the gold rush. Scrooge, who is alive in 1987, was alive for the gold rush and made my money there.
It makes more sense in the original comic because in the original timeline, like Scrooge is meant to die like in the 60s, in the 1960s, because he was there for the quote-unquote taming of America, the wild frontier days.
Don Rosa in Life and Times really invests in that, and he set specific years to every scene. Like the Yukon, he arrives in the Klondike in 1897, which in 1987 would make him over 100. And there's an even better joke in the Klondike Goldie episode of 2017 DuckTales, which I watched. They hang more of a lantern on it where they're just like, wait, you were in the gold rush? How is that at all possible? And he just kind of looks at the camera and just moves on. But they have a number of jokes in that show I noticed too that imply that Scrooge has gone through multiple de-aging things on his adventures. So that's how
he says that to Goldie. He says something like, Goldie, you look great. And she's like, oh, I found the Fountain of Youth. And he's like, I've been looking for that. Like there's like little references to they keep finding artifacts and stuff that help him live forever, like Nick Fury.
And Allison Janney, she plays Goldie and she's really good. She's
so good.
But yeah, sorry. The White Agony Creek.
Yes, so we're introduced to Goldie when Scrooge walks into this saloon that sells sody pop because it's a cartoon. But Goldie is introduced with a great song. I'll play that now.
I'm just a poor girl, bashful and shy, honest and truthful, I can't tell a lie. My needs are quite simple, they're modest and small. Just listen while I tell you all. Yeah. Don't care for diamonds, rubies, or pearls. Don't care for fur coats like some other girls. Just give me the one thing that's easy to spend. Gold nuggets are my own best friend.
Yeah, gold nuggets are my truest friends. I love that song. Yeah.
And her voice is patterned after the famous classic movie starlet Mae West, the very horny, like, come up and see me sometime.
My first thought was of the parody of that kind of stuff in Blazing Saddles.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're right.
The Madeline Kahn song.
I'm sure they had Blazing Saddles on the mind. It was like, I don't know, a decade later, less than a decade later.
Though, in that, I couldn't not think of Lupin III watching this. And
yeah.
When she has something for dancing, it was like, there's a little Fujiko in you. Goldie here.
It's a great little scene. It's like a great little performance of that time. She's like on a big swing and everything.
And I love the spirit of her song is that like, I don't care about diamonds, rubies, or pearls. Give me gold. I want all of it.
I want this specific type of valuable object.
Yeah, in the comics, when they see her again in this story, she's like a fragile old woman. And in both the cartoons, they see her, she's like this badass, sexy old lady. And I think both of the cartoons have improved on the comic story in that way.
Very much so.
Yeah, she's not treated very well in the comic, but she's more of a scheming, like, evil character.
I mean, for all the compliments you can give Barks, portrayals of women are not one of them.
Yeah.
But, look, no, but who's perfect here?
He was born in 1901.
She's a Catwoman, basically, to him. She's like, when they see each other, they're gonna fuck, but she's gonna take whatever he has and be like, get the hell out of here. I'll see you in 5 years again.
And the sex is amazing. Scrooge orders a mint soda, heavy on the mint, heavy on the soda, when he runs into Dangerous Dan, who calls him Scrounge McDuck. Dangerous Dan, another big dickhead of this White Agony Creek.
He is snidely Whiplash. Like, he just is so evil from the first second you see him.
He is like a Western movie villain, like a real mustache twirler.
Which you wonder why Scrooge is known for being smarter than the Smarties and tougher than the Toughies, or sharper than the Sharpies. But I think they got rid of that because I think that's more of a slur or something. Sharpie, I don't know, but
I don't think so.
Well, but anyway,
I hate the Sharpies.
But he gets tricked by Dangerous Dan, which I would think a saloon owner is the last person you trust.
I think he's more like muscled into it. So Dan asks how he's going to pay for his drinks. He reveals the goose egg nugget, which is just a regular nugget in this story. In the comic, it's a more important thing for Scrooge. It's called the goose egg nugget. I think because when Goldie gives it back to him, she throws it at his head. It makes a goose egg on his head. That's why.
In the Don Rosa book, he shows it as the first thing he finds that makes him say he is rich. Like, when he finds a goose egg nugget, he's like, I am officially rich now. Is this going to change my life? No, I'm rich. Yay. And he just starts dancing.
But yeah, so Scrooge orders drinks from the house for everyone who didn't laugh at him.
Love that line. That's a great line.
Goldie, again, nuggets are a girl's best friend. She sees Scrooge's nugget. And basically, I mean, we can say Scrooge falls for this, but he's basically forced into a card game. He's like escorted to a card table. There's disguised drinking, there's guns, and also gambling in this DuckTales episode.
It's amazing. They got that again feels like first production order. They did it. And I couldn't find the uncut version of this episode, but there are 2 cuts that they make in the Amazon version that they did pretty much for all repeat airings of it. So these have been cut for a while. I think, though, on the DVD they were uncut. But in this scene, during the card game, if you watch it in the Amazon version, Scrooge just starts spontaneously coughing, and that distracts him.
Very weird, very odd.
And the reason it's so weird is because Dangerous Dan shoots his gun to knock a cork off of a bottle, and then he blows the smoke off of the gun into Scrooge's face, which that sounds really cool, but it's some extra gunplay in a show already full of it.
And I guess that makes more sense with that scene because it's what distracts Scrooge, so Goldie can pull the secret deck out from her garter where she's hiding it. So yeah, that actually makes more sense. That is why he was coughing, and that's why he was distracted.
Instead of like a bug flew into his mouth off screen.
Yeah, very, very odd. I wish that scene was back in. Too many guns. But so again, everyone's playing cards, everyone is folding, and Scrooge and Goldie are the only 2 left. And this is when Goldie pulls the deck from her garter, the secret deck, and replaces the deck they're playing with, and then this scene happens.
Ooh, what do you know? This is my lucky day. Too bad it isn't yours.
Well, knock me over with a twig. Out of a whole deck of cards, what are the chances of Goldie getting an ace of hearts? An ace of hearts! An ace of hearts! Come back here, you little cheater! Oh, you want to dance?
That's when Dangerous Dan does a fun little comedy fighting dance and throws Scrooge out of the bar.
I love his spinning animation.
Yeah.
They do that's some classic anime right there too.
It's very well done. So in the comic, again, a comic for its day, Goldie invites Scrooge for coffee when she sees his nugget. She drugs him, and he wakes up in a snowdrift, basically. And then he comes back to the bar, fights the entire bar off screen. So when we cut back to Scrooge, there's heaps of people. And he basically kidnaps Goldie and makes her work for him.
Turnabout is fair play.
Yeah,
She drugged him first. What am I saying here? No, but
that's when it's okay to capture a woman, everybody, if they drug you first.
But a consistent theme of Barks that Don Rosa really picked up on in his books is that Scrooge is the only person who works hard in the entire world, and everyone else is trying to rip him off, and that's why he is so angry and hateful. He's like, all I do is work to death, and then everyone tries to steal from me, so fuck everybody. That's what hardens his heart. There's a great moment in the Don Rosa book, too, where Goldie has small appearances in it, but she says, come on, Scrooge, don't you want to come in here for some dinner? He's like, I already ate once this week. I'm not wasting money on more.
That does sound like Scrooge. In the comic version of the story, there is a bizarre device that eventually pays off where Scrooge, it starts off with Scrooge forgetting things, and then he goes to the doctor, and the doctor gives him these memory pills where he has to take them or he'll forget things. So he starts taking them. That's when he remembers the Klondike area and his claim there and everything. And in the end, the memory pills pay off. We'll get to that when the episode itself pays off. But the memory pills device, which I think is kind of stupid, it's not in the DuckTales version of the story.
It's a kid's comic thing.
It's true. It's true.
I feel like an episodic thing to throw in there. But I do want to say about Scrooge's cheapness. I have here in my notes, like Ron Swanson, Scrooge McDuck is the mythical good libertarian.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, which doesn't exist. Libertarians are all bad and stupid. But the thing about Scrooge's cheapness, why it is a virtue and done well, is that it's consistent, and it also comes from a genuine, real place of belief in him, which is he truly has, because people all the time try and give me the gotcha of you like Scrooge, but you hate billionaires. And I'm like, Scrooge literally earned every single cent that he has, which is not true of any person who has over, I don't know, $1 million.
He was not born into wealth.
Yeah, and not only that, but he knows where every single cent in his money bin came from. If you show him a penny, he'll be like, yes, this was minted in 1941 and I got it from this thing. And he actually, he is smart and does this because, and he's only cheap because he loves money. He doesn't, he's, and it also helps that he's cheap about himself. He wears a shitty frock coat that he only got because he traded his fancy tuxedo for it because it was on sale. He doesn't eat and he doesn't do anything because he's a cheap bastard. And
he says, why
do you it hurt himself?
And he says, why do you buy new newspapers? You can read yesterday's for free. It's right on the ground.
It's his cheapness doesn't, and also he doesn't allow his cheapness to actually hurt other people. He does have many charities, and Duckburg was built around his money bin, and he does help the boys. He just makes sure you will absolutely earn every single, and he does have a will. He's mentioned his will. He's going to leave that money to them at some point.
He also, he does exploit people, but without thinking about it. They usually try to put some innocence there where Donald works to death for nothing for him. And then they'll say to him that really sucked, Uncle Scrooge. He's like, oh man, well, I'll never do that again. Don't worry.
Yeah. In the comic, he forgets he has his own airline, so they walk to the Klondike, and they get really mad at him. He's just like, "Oh, sorry."
But they probably have better health insurance than any Amazon employee.
That's true.
That's probably true.
I want to get on that Scrooge plan. It's better than the Bronze plan. So Dan swings Scrooge out the door. They turn the actual brutal fight from the comic into a comedy fight where Dan is the only person who gets injured. He gets knocked into the piano that then sails at the door. The important thing to mention is Goldie did steal Scrooge's nugget, which this episode says she doesn't for some reason.
Yeah.
And the nugget, she puts the nugget in the piano. Dan gets knocked into the piano and sails at the door, and he steals the nugget because he's outside with the nugget. So technically Dan stole it, but really Goldie put it somewhere. She stole it first.
She stole it.
Yeah.
She cheated in a game to steal his thing and then didn't give it back. And if she had just said, well, I hid the nugget there and it's gone, then that'd be fine. But there are a few little story issues in this that don't come together that we talked about it yesterday, Bob, that it is like you have a Japanese studio kind of having to fill in the blanks of an incomplete storyboard, like, or not incomplete, but not,
Yeah, it's like you get this many drawings and like fill in the blanks here. So this is after Dan gets knocked out of the bar and Scrooge is back for his nugget. And in the future, Scrooge decides to go back for his claim.
I'll trouble you for my gold nugget, ma'am.
I haven't got it, sourdough.
Then I'll be forced to call the mounted police.
Oh, wait. Don't call the police. I'll dig you another gold nugget.
Ha! With all due respect, ma'am, you wouldn't know how to earn an honest living if you tried.
Oh, yeah? Just watch me. Last one to your claim is a worthless nugget. Where is your claim, anyway?
White Agony Creek.
Gold nuggets are my truest friend.
Well, Goldie turned out to be the hardest worker I ever knew. Next to myself.
So in the cartoon, they're sort of on an equal playing field. Like they compete to dig the most gold, which actually happens last in the comic. I mentioned in comic again, if you actually want to read the comic and you don't want to pay $30 for a hardcover, it's on YouTube. Someone made a YouTube version of the comic.
Oh yeah,
without
that,
they're not reading the dialogue, but it does a pretty good job of moving between panel to panel with some music.
Yeah, it's like a guided view kind of thing, right? Yeah. One thing that bugged me in this section though, there's a couple like very low comedy sound effects. Like when he gets his hard eyes, it's like sproing, like
those feel like added like after the fact, like cartoon it up, everybody.
Yeah, I didn't like those so much. But there are some real sweet moments, like when he's wiping soot off her face. It's like, oh, that's cute.
Like Scrooge is setting up a touching montage of them digging, and he says, when spring came, we had a big pile of gold and bigger plans for the future. And that's when they promised to meet each other at the train station. And Goldie gives Scrooge that Valentine that we see at the beginning of the episode. So this is still
delivered,
in the past.
as he said, yes. Yep. And their stuff at White Agony Creek is very touching. I also really love Goldie's old school sourdough design of like her fringed jacket.
Yeah.
It's really neat. Yeah.
It's very cool. And Scrooge is getting ready to go to Duckburg with Goldie, and he's singing a variant of Bicycle Built for Two, which I thought was a good touch because that song was written in 1892, which puts it directly in this era. It was a popular song of this era. So he's singing a song about Goldie and gold nuggets to that.
That's great.
Tune. Yeah.
Wow.
I like that touch. It wasn't just a
That's
song.
funny because that's also like actual cartoons of the day. It's like when you look at, Steamboat Willie and he's whistling Turkey in the Straw, it feels like he's just whistling a song that everyone knows and that is an old song. And you look into it and you're like, no, they have the rights to that song. And this is an actual music video to promote that song. And it was new at the time.
Bicycle Built for Two was the moves like Jagger of its time.
Way before Hal sang it.
That's true. So Scrooge goes to the bar, Dan's bar, to ask about Goldie. And Dan tells him she found a big stash and left to open her own tonky tonk. And in the future, this is when Scrooge decides to go back to the Klondike.
And so I moved far, far away to Red Agony Creek, where I became a hermit and mined my fortune alone. Of course, I never was as happy at Red Agony Creek as I was at White Agony.
Aw, you miss her, don't you, Uncle Scrooge?
Sometimes, Webby.
Do you think there's still gold at White Agony, Uncle Scrooge?
Could be, Dewey. I only took a wee bit out of that claim. Wait a minute. It's still my claim. Boys, pack your bags. We're going to the Klondike.
Yippee!
I'll show you the town, and we'll go to my claim. And who knows, we might even find Goldie, the gold.
It's really weird that Launchpad is not in this episode.
Yeah. Actually,
Maybe because it is the first production episode.
Maybe that's why.
Who knows?
Yeah. I wish... There are moments in here where I wish Scrooge was cheaper. Like he's honestly being a little extravagant, getting a whole train and buying tickets for all the kids. Like I like in the first airing episode of the first part of that 5-parter, like he steals a bunch of cheese samples. He's like, "We're having cheese for dinner, kids."
And they have to fly like on a class with chickens and livestock when they go to wherever in that first or second episode.
Yeah, I wish he was a little cheaper. And then meanwhile, you hear Webby's voice in there. She just... Scrooge is too soft in these. I think he's
Yeah.
too much of a softie. And
This episode-
and Webby, especially when she's like, "Oh, Uncle Scrooge," he's like, "Maybe, Webby." I'm like, "Come on, Scrooge, toughen up."
This is the softest Scrooge because it's an episode about him in love.
Yeah.
So, I
yeah.
mean, they are not this mushy with Scrooge all the time, but it's very much like the softer side of Scrooge, which is why I like this episode. It's just a different side of Scrooge that we get.
Yeah. Well, and then they get on that train, and man, TMS are good at animating trains.
They love
Like,
trains.
They're great at it. They should love trains.
Yeah, for a second I was like, that can't be CG, right? Like it just looks so perfect.
Just a lot of drawings. But yeah, my question story-wise, like re-examining this now in the podcast, like, why did Goldie leave without him?
Yeah, why didn't she find him? Like, where was she?
There's no reason for her to be gone. Like in the comic, she sucks. She's mean. She wants to steal from Scrooge. This whole "I'll meet you at the blank" was not in the comic, but there's no reason why she shouldn't be meeting Scrooge.
In 2017, she has directly attempted to kill him multiple times. Like there's no ambiguity about it. But in here, yeah, the most you get is she says, "No, you left without me." Like, so.
Yeah, I assume
perhaps you could assume that Dangerous Dan told her some lie that made her go somewhere else too.
I think that's it. There was no scene of him like, "That's exactly what I told Goldie." I'm sure that's probably what was implied there in that scene. So Scrooge can't wait to show the kids Dangerous Dan's honky tonk, but all the rootin' and tootin' up and left. It's a very ghost town style town because
everyone's dead from then. It was 100. It was 90 years ago.
That's true. It's also the gold rush is over.
Yes,
it ended before the 20th century. I'm pretty sure.
I mean, by that point, most of those Yukon things would at least be built into like a suburb or something. You would think.
But Dangerous Dan is still there with his sidekick, and he smells money. He knows if Scrooge is here, Scrooge is back. He smells money. But Scrooge decides to investigate his old claim.
Ah, here we are. White Agony Creek. My old home, sweet home. Well, knock me out with a raindrop. Someone's living in my cabin, rent-free. Egad, must be cutthroat claim jumpers. Lelo, lads, I'll wait till nightfall to sneak up and disarm the rogues. I know this place like the back of my head.
So yeah, this part is like the comic where they arrive at the claim. They don't know it's a woman, but someone is firing at them, and Scrooge can't get the police involved because he didn't pay taxes on his claim. I like that little touch.
I do love that, yeah. And that's the cheapest Scrooge gets in this, where he's mad it was rent-free, which Alan Young really good at rolling them R's.
He's
like,
so
what a pro.
good as Scrooge. So they decide to wait until the dead of night, and basically all
His
this...
hat gets so his hat gets so shot up too.
Yeah.
I love all the holes in his hat. That somewhat consistent in the episode.
Yeah, but it's like Scrooge will be murdered with a gun if he messes this up. But he decides to like go under the cover of night to investigate this cabin, and in the comic they have a lot of different schemes, but most of the stuff with this bear is similar to the comic, and frankly they could have cut this out for more story stuff, like the bear antics. I feel like there could have been more story because the story wraps up a little too quickly in this episode.
Yeah, I guess they just, bear stuff is fun, animal adventures, that feels more kiddie, and that is in the Barks original too. I mean, the joke of climbing the tree until it's upside down and looking at the ground is there, though it's Donald who goes through that, not
it is Donald.
Scrooge.
So they make many attempts to avoid this bear. They try to capture it, but it just like bursts through the cage.
I love when the Junior Woodchuck Guide fails them. They're just like, and that the Junior Woodchuck Guide has all information ever, and it just tells you anything. Like,
it's
that's
sort of
amazing.
like Penny's book on Inspector Gadget, except it's not a computer.
It's very similar.
So while Scrooge is being chased away by this bear, Huey, Dewey, and Louie discover the claim jumper is a glamorous lady.
Crack-a-rooney! You're a lady claim jumper.
And darn proud of it. What do you yahoos want?
Hey, lady, you gotta call off your bear before he eats Uncle Scrooge.
Scrooge? As in Scrooge McDuck?
Uh-huh.
So, the no-good varmint is back. Oh, I can't let him see me like this.
So Goldie is a much more respected character in this version. In the Barks comic, she's very much like an old spinster, like very scraggly looking, and she's like basically says like, "This is what happened to the glamorous girls of the Klondike. They're all dried up old women now."
Ouch.
Yeah, so she's just
Yeah.
like she's a hermit like Scrooge was, but she never got beyond that.
But I like that this Goldie cares about how she looks. She's like, you know what? I got to look my best when I meet Scrooge again to let him know I'm not some old lady. Like I like that she says like, I'm as good as I was. Like, don't you forget it. Like she has a little more self-respect. I also, though, the nephews really struck me how sexist they are in this series. Like they're treated as wrong, and they are always proven wrong. Of like, oh, you underestimated Miss Beakley or Webby or this gal, this old lady. Like they always are proven wrong. Oh, we shouldn't have done that. And though now I really feel like, especially with how like lame Webby is, I feel like Goslin was created to be the anti-Webby.
Definitely, and the nerdy character that gets captured is Honker, the boy in that world.
No,
the boys in this are like, why would you ever talk to a girl? Like, they're so mean to her.
It's even worse to dance with them. Like they hate cooties, which I mean, that is the stereotype of boys up to even then.
Yeah, I mean, we've eliminated cooties like polio, so it's all fine now. But
yeah, I got my shot. Circle, circle, dot, dot.
Oh, man. That's
I forgot about the cootie shot. Wow, damn.
Vaccinate your kids.
Yes.
Okay, make sure your kids get cootie shots.
Oh, and there's one more gun cut here,
Oh, please,
too.
please tell me.
So, yes, after she does her quick change back into her old outfit, they took away her shotgun, so they think she's unarmed. They say to her, "Are you going to help Uncle Scrooge?" There's just a hard cut there in the one that's on Amazon, but in original airing, she then pulls out her revolver and says, "Nah, I'm going to take another shot at him."
Nice.
and goes off. So that's why she has a revolver in the next shot.
And she eventually does take a shot at him in this next scene.
Start running, Scrooge McDuck. I'll give you a sporting chance.
You're the claim jumper?
Had no place else to go when they closed up the town. The gold in these parts ran out right after you left.
I left to forget, but a day hasn't gone by I haven't thought of you.
Oh? Really? You could always charm the quills off of a porcupine.
Well, it's better than holding hands with that bear. If you say so.
Remember how we planned to leave the Klondike together? But you left with our gold instead of leaving with me.
I did not. You left without me.
Only because you left without me.
I didn't steal your gold, you varmint.
So she fires a warning shot, and then Scrooge runs to hide behind a rock, and her firing at Scrooge for the intent to murder shows that there is gold underneath the rocks.
That was a pretty great moment there. And then he laughs a lot. It was something. It feels right for Alan Young's Scrooge to laugh a lot because there's an old man warmth to him. So he's like, ha, ha, ha. Like I really like that. But the Scrooge of Barks or Don Rosa, like he would be screaming for back rent, or he'd be mad about things. And that's what I do like about the 2017 Scrooge is a lot more humorless. And really the only things he laughs at are very mean-spirited things that happen to other people.
In this one, he's being sweet, but he's still asking for money back. Like, you still owe me money.
There's a great episode in the new series. The Christmas special is great because he's like, I hate Christmas. And he even says, bah humbug. And Webby's like, he said it. And then he's like, I'm going to my room and don't bother me. And then somebody, I think Huey, goes in there and realizes that he's like, he's lying because he wants to have his own little party and that he didn't invite anybody to.
So Scrooge and Goldie plan on mining this gold together just like last time, but Scrooge won't drop the nugget. He wants that nugget back. Goldie says again, I did not take the nugget, although she did. We saw earlier in the episode she did. She just didn't keep it. She took it but didn't keep it, which is still stealing. If I were to remove
the piano.
What's that? Yeah, if I were to steal something from like Walgreens and like put it behind a fire hydrant, I still stole it.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
And there's a very Scroogey statement as they talk about they're going to start mining. He says like, nothing like hard work to clear the head, which is
true.
like, that is exactly how Scrooge McDuck thinks.
That is his philosophy. So Goldie leaves angrily for town with the bear, and meanwhile, Dangerous Dan and his buddy are watching as Scrooge and the nephews do all the work, and they will eventually rob him as old men.
That's I think that's what Karl Barks imagined most of the world was, of people trying to rob you from your hard work.
And he's right.
He was right. That is exactly what Disney did to him.
Only it's not bandits, it's like health insurance companies and cable companies.
I was going to say Disney, who owns the rights to Scrooge and stole it from him after he did all the hard work of making Scrooge comics.
You might know this, Matthew. Is Karl Barks given a credit on the new DuckTales?
I think so. They mention him a lot in the promotional material and stuff. I'm not sure if he gets an actual credit, and if he doesn't, it's because Disney won't let them. I'm sure Angonius and those guys want to. And
I know in interviews they were very upfront about it. And I mean, we talked about the joke where he gets the Don Cheadle voice. It's called like a Barksian translator. So they have references in there. I know that they made Barks. He's definitely in the Disney Legends Club because it would be insulting for him not to be. But and also Karl Barks, he was in the Eisner Awards when they created their Hall of Fame. They had 3. They usually only did 1 a year, and they did 3 in their inaugural year. And it was Will Eisner, Jack Kirby, and Karl Barks, because those 3 are undeniably in 1986 the most important American comic creators of all time.
And I just watched the credits for 2017 DuckTales. No Barks. No Barks.
It feels like the legal department there.
It feels like his estate might want money if we give him credit. So meanwhile, Goldie is catching up with Dangerous Dan.
Dangerous Dan?
Got any plans for tonight?
Yep. And as usual, they ain't gonna be with you.
Aw, come on, Goldie. We'll take a little ride, shoot a little target practice, rob a little train.
Scrooge is on that train.
Oh, does that bother you?
Shoot. He's a bigger knothead than you are. And I want nothing to do with him or his gold.
She's not coming. Still in love with Scrooge, huh? Nah, she hates him even worse than she hates me. Yeah, you lucky guy.
So I get the feeling Dan has been asking her out every day for like 90 years.
Yep. Yeah.
This guy's like an incel. He's like, come on. Oh, you owe me.
Come on. What? You've been turning me down all this time.
Yeah.
There's literally no one else here. Come on.
She is the only woman in White Agony Creek. I think even back then.
And they're all 130. Like that. Or at the very least, you could think that Scrooge is in his 20s then, but in the flashback, but Dangerous Dan is like mid-30s.
Yeah, he's much older than Scrooge in those flashbacks.
Yeah, it's gotta suck to want someone so long that your dick doesn't even work by the time you can possibly have them.
At that point, it's just all about platonic relationships.
But meanwhile, the nephews and Scrooge really did a good job digging up gold. They just got a shitload of gold.
They're returning on a train, in a train car, surrounded by gold. They should really hire security. I mean, honestly.
And Scrooge is too cheap for that. He didn't even buy them seats in the train. They're just like, we'll get one cable car and we'll sit with the gold.
Well, in this universe, gold is very comfy.
It does seem that way.
It's not cold and stinky. But yes, they're riding back on the train. Scrooge is moping about never seeing Goldie again. That's when Dangerous Dan strikes. He fires into the train, trying to murder the nephews.
Directly at them. They're dodging of bullets is looping as hell.
It's so cool. The way they're scrambling and diving and ducking. It's really neat.
I love it. And you can really feel the physics of the gold coins or the gold pouring out of the bags.
It's really cool, like grains of sand or something like that. So one of them is on the roof, and they need to stop him from stopping the train. And meanwhile, Dan, a very nice touch in this episode to get around some of the potential gun violence is Dan has a gun. And by getting on the train, he loses the gun. There's a scene of him losing his gun while getting on the train. It's very believable because it gets snagged on its horse's bridle. It gets pulled off of his waist.
Yeah, I like that too, that it makes it an even fight between the two of them. And when he pulls out his gun but doesn't have a gun in his hand, I like how Scrooge's like, it's not polite to point.
Yeah, I like that part because it's otherwise Scrooge would have a gun pointed to his head.
Well, he would have just been shot in the face by Dan.
And there's plenty of gun violence in this episode, but even if Dan had a gun and Scrooge outsmarted him, having Scrooge at point blank about to be murdered by a character, too far from 87, I think.
I think so. I think they knew that was, and then instead they get in some very 80s no punching Ninja Turtles kind of fight of whoopsie doo, I go under your arms and pull. I mean, the non-violent cartoon fight go-to move is pull down the pants, and then the guy goes like, "No, my boxer shorts."
my dignity, no. Yeah, I mean, it's a very well animated fight, and they do a good job of avoiding making it a violent fight, which it should be. Damn it! But a fight on top of a train is really cool.
It is really cool, yeah. And there's some really good like TMS again, if I may slob on that knob, is TMS. The way they animate like them speaking, a duck moving their mouth to talk is not normal, and yet they make it look like, especially when he says it's not polite to point, there's a little extra nod and movement to each word, like the lip sync, which is even more impressive when you know that TMS traditionally in Japanese animation, you don't do lip sync. You record voice afterwards. So that they're so good at lip sync is just another bee in their bonnet, I'd say.
So after tricking Dangerous Dan, Scrooge ties him up, but his buddy, unnamed I believe, reaches the engine and the conductor stops the train. And at this point, it looks like Dan got the best of Scrooge.
Looks like I got the best of you again.
Again? You've never got the best of me, Dangerous Dan.
Oh, yeah? Years ago, I stole your last shipment of Klondike gold. Then when you came looking for Goldie, I made you think she did it.
Dangerous Dan, you are so low, you have to look up to see a snake.
I figure now that I'm rich, maybe Glittering Goldie will be my Valentine. Maybe not.
Scrooge, are you all right?
I am now, lassie. But for all these years, I've been all wrong.
So Dan is scared away in like less than a second.
Yeah, he gives up. He should be arrested. He doesn't get much payback there, honestly.
It's true. He just kind of spooked away by Goldie firing at him.
But that shot of him speaking to camera while bragging to Scrooge, and then a bullet basically hits him in the head, except it knocks his hat off, and then he reacts to it, is the best animation in the episode, and it's amazing. I was just like dumbstruck at how good it was, and that they got away with shooting him in the head
and having a gun pointed at the camera. Yeah, basically, it was so. Again, I
love that shot.
I love the non-PC stuff in this episode where it's just I mean, guns suck and we hate guns, but it's just kind of naughty to see guns in a kid's cartoon like this. In a fun context.
I am pro gun control, but also anti gun controlling animated guns.
Yeah, give all the characters guns. Snoopy, give him a gun.
I mean, he
does. He has a plane with guns on it.
Oh man, he's got plenty of guns.
He's a killer. Snoopy's killed a lot of people.
A lot of Germans.
It was all in World War I. What's murder on the battlefield? You know.
Yeah.
I say that about Snoopy. I only say that about fictional troops, by the way.
So in the very end, this wraps up with a nice little sentimental scene between Scrooge and Goldie. It's framed very well. They're sitting on top of Blackjack, framed by the moon, and the train goes by in the background and puffs up a cloud of heart smoke. It's very, very too cute, but I still like it.
The moon looks like a big gold nugget.
Oh, Scroogey Poo, there is a romantic side to you.
Sure you won't come with me?
I'm sorry, Scrooge. White Agony is my home now.
I understand. There's something I want you to have.
Oh, a Valentine.
No, Goldie. It's something better. It's the deed to my claim and all the gold left in it.
You sure are something, Scrooge McDuck.
Oh, it's the least I can do, Goldie girl. You didn't steal my gold, but I'm afraid you've stolen my heart.
That was the bear, by the way. A sweet ending for Scrooge in this episode, although Goldie will not come with him, though she does return in the series.
Oh, that's
I think
good.
at least once there's another Goldie episode.
Those heart-shaped puffs of smoke, they also really remind me of... in the opening of the show Sherlock Hound, they have kind of that similar shots of smoke coming out of the train. I mean, which they would have animated 2 years before DuckTales.
That's right. I was just going to ask what year that was, but it was 85?
Technically, the original production began in 82, but that was the first 6 episodes, and then they hit a copyright problem, and then Hayao Miyazaki left, and so then they made the rest after. But basically, within 5 years of DuckTales production, they were making those Sherlock Hound episodes, which all really great. I look for someday a Sherlock Hound, what a cartoon.
And
will
they're
happen.
very easy to watch.
Yep, at least in America anyway.
Yeah. But this episode, there are better DuckTales episodes, but again, I wanted to do one about a Bark story and one about Scrooge's past and one that shows a different side of Scrooge. I think this episode succeeds. There are a few story problems. It plays fast and loose with the rules of the comic it's based on, but I do enjoy this episode. And again, even a bad DuckTales episode has really good animation. Just go back and watch just the random episode. You'll love how it looks.
So this ending, the change they made, I'm glad they made Goldie a more like assertive character and less sad and mean. But I do think one change they make from the comic, in the comic, Scrooge intentionally loses the contest with her to let her get the deed as a gift, but he can't admit he's doing that. And it leaves her kind of hating him still too. In this ending, though, it makes even less sense that she won't be with him. It's like, so we both agree we love each other now, and we're very close to each other, but you just won't leave, huh? Cool, whatever. It's not like we're not 110 and we're both going to die tomorrow.
Like, I'm sorry, Scrooge. This is a syndicated series that needs to be played in any order, so I cannot come with you.
So that's why if they had angry feelings to each other, at least that would explain why he leaves. But instead, she just has to say, "Now, White Agony is my home now." The end. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you're right, Henry. In the comic story, it is like a softer side of Scrooge. Like, he can't admit to it. Like, in this one, he's like, "I love you." Like, "I'm sorry all that stuff happened." In the comic, he's got to, like, pretend that he forgot where the gold was to let her win. I mean, he won't admit that, but he still let it happen. So he feels bad for everything that happened to her after he left.
Yeah, but this is a amazingly animated episode that is a really good adaptation for its time, and I love all the guns, man. So much fun gunplay. Yeah, the only negative I'd say on this is that it does, as a classic DuckTales, we do miss out on some fun launchpad shenanigans, and no Gizmo Duck either. But this is still a really good episode that, especially if you're a Barks enthusiast, you get a real sense of what DuckTales would do with the Barks originals it was handed.
Any final thoughts on this episode, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, you guys are totally right. It's totally solid. I think overall it looks really nice, but was kind of a boring episode, which is how I feel about a lot of the original DuckTales show. That you're right, when Launchpad's not there and no Donald, when it's just Scrooge and the boys, I think it loses something, especially because I love Russi Taylor, I love her performance as the boys, but at a certain point, hearing that voice for a whole episode, just like it really grates on me.
There are better villains than Dangerous Dan, like Magica Dispel and Flintheart Glomgold, people like that.
Especially that too. I don't care about
and no
Dangerous
Beagle
Dan.
Boys either here too.
Yeah. I think Dangerous Dan's voice is funny, but I don't care about him and want to see him again. If they bring him into the new show and do him better, that'd be cool. Overall, I think this episode is entirely fine, but it's not a huge. It's kind of like this episode is a good example of what I'm not a huge fan of the old show about, which is just that. I also I didn't mention this earlier during the bear fight. We were talking about like what a badass Scrooge is in the comics, and I think he's not just like personality wise softened. When he's fighting that bear, I was like, man, he's like a wuss in the cartoon, kind of.
Yeah, in the 5-parter, he actually does beat a crocodile. I was like, that's the Scrooge I know. But yeah, this Scrooge, I mean, it is silly in the comics that a 100-year-old man is as strong as he is. But I think maybe they didn't want to... that's a little too weird for the show to do that. I mean,
maybe
now that I know I truly understand how powerful Scrooge is, even in his old age in the Barks comics, him pogoing around or doing any of his things in the NES game all makes sense. It's like, no, Scrooge could totally do that shit and more.
Yeah, when he first like touches the bear and the bear looks at him and snarls and he's like, "You're on my land." I was like, "That's cool." And then when he gets scared and runs away, I was like, "Aw!" Like I wanted him to be like, because there's a big moment in Life and Times where a lion snarls at him in Africa, and then he just snarls back, and the lion becomes his pet that he rides around all the time, and everyone's scared of him. He like rides it into town and like parks it by the horses. And I wanted something like that in the episode, but gorgeous episode. The animation
Yeah.
is amazing and worth watching for that.
It's a relic of its time, but it's also a very important piece of animation history. And we wouldn't have like the animation renaissance that we all lived through and the period afterwards without DuckTales sort of saying like it can be good.
Yep,
we can make this good.
We have DuckTales and Disney and Michael Eisner, honestly, and TMS, all those folks for making that new expansion of 90s animation possible.
Mm-hmm. So before we go, Matthew, our special guest, can you tell us where we can find you and support you? You've got some podcasts. You've got a good Twitter account. Actually, 2 Twitter accounts. Where can we find you?
Yeah, I have too many podcasts. I'm on Twitter at Mr. Matt J, and also the Twitter for my other show, which is at Adult Swim Pod, which is for the show The Deep End that I host with Steve Yurko, who is an animation professional and a cool dude. And we are going through every show ever aired on Adult Swim, including we just did the pilot for the Groovenians, which totally sucks. We also did the pilot for Welcome to Eltingville with Will Hines. We interviewed James Urbaniak. You know, we have all kinds of cool animation and comedy and writer people on to dissect these weird old comedic television shows. And I also do the Cartoons 101 podcast at patreon.com/cartoons101, where I interview animation professionals and also went through all of Neon Genesis Evangelion with a bunch of guests, including you guys, all the works of Satoshi Kon with you guys and a bunch of other awesome guests. And now I'm going through all the films of Ralph Bakshi as voted by my patrons, which has been a really cool experience so far. So check that out over there. And you can also find the Deep End show on patreon.com/The Deep End, where every week you get an extra podcast about the Venture Brothers. And now we're doing once a month an MTV animated show, which right now is MTV, but it'll change to other stuff. But we just did Clone High, and I don't know when this goes up, but May 1st, if you've been waiting for that whole episode podcast deep dive into 3 South, we got it for you. We're the guys who are going to do it.
Oh, you're going to do undergrad soon, aren't you, then?
We're going to do undergrads, yep.
Man.
I think it's the next one.
You are truly a prolific podcaster, Matt. And
I have 2... I don't know. I am actually launching another show soon.
My goodness.
And I actually told my co-host I'm going to do that with, Mike Pearl. We had one idea that we really liked that was very niche. And I actually told him, like, okay, I have another idea that if I'm going to launch another show, it needs to be like at least a little bit marketable to build an audience. All my shows are so niche. And I was like, we need to do a more, a one that has an easier pitch to people. And we're going to do one that has an easier pitch. And then we'll hopefully launch that soon.
Oh, great.
Awesome. Well, especially hearing how busy you are, thanks so much for coming on the show, Matt.
Again, thank you to Matthew J. for being part of the podcast. But if you want to support us as well, please go to patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. And for the low price of $5 a month, you'll get every episode of this podcast and Talking Simpsons 1 week ahead of time and ad-free. And on top of that, for $5 a month, you'll get all of our bonus podcasts at that tier. That includes exclusive series like the currently unfurling Talking of the Hill, our entire first season treatment of King of the Hill, and that is alongside things like Talking Futurama and Talking Critic, and all future mini-series we do will be locked behind the $5 tier. Henry, what is our exciting $10 tier all about?
Well, if you want to hear us talk about an animated feature film once a month for up to and including more than 3 hours, you should sign up at the $10 and up level to hear our What a Cartoon Movie podcast. We've done so many amazing cartoons here. And if you sign up right now, you'll get to hear our April 1 very soon of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. It's going to be a ton of fun, folks. And there's over a dozen hours of movie podcasts you can listen to right now, $10 and up at patreon.com/Talkin' Simpsons.
As for me, I have been one of your hosts, Bob Mackey. You can find me on Twitter as Bob Servo. My other podcast is Retronauts. Go to retronauts.com or look for Retronauts in your podcast device. It's a classic gaming podcast. Find it and subscribe to it and then listen to it. Why don't you? Henry, how about you?
I'm HENREYG on Twitter. Follow me there for all the updates on our podcast, both Wanted Cartoon and Talking Simpsons. Anytime something new goes live, you'll hear about it first from my Twitter account, HENEREYG.
Thanks so much for joining us, folks. We'll see you next time for The Promised Neverland, episode number 1. We'll see you then.
give me your answer, do. I love nuggets almost as much as you.